So welcome everyone, and thank you for being here with us today at this ETIPWind kickoff event. We are here to celebrate another round of investment and trust in ETIPWind, and I would like to thank the European Commission for placing that trust in us in further advising the European Commission on the necessary technologies to ensure the leadership of Europe in wind power. And secondly, also to thank for the investments in the platform such that all of us can get together here today, but also to continue our work that we have started many years back and drive these technology discussions and drive this argumentation and influencing work that we are doing here at ETIPWind to work together with the industry, work together with academia, and together with the European Commission to make sure that we deliver the leadership of Europe in the wind energy. We have put a lot of good topics on an agenda today. We are quite a good size number here in the room, but we also have about 100 people connected online from their remote desks at home or in their own companies there. So it is a hybrid event for all of us here. They will be able to post questions over the Slido. Please here be as interacting as possible. We will have panel discussions, we will have presentations from the industry side, from academia, but also from the European Commission. Before we go to the agenda, a bit of housekeeping activities. As I said, for the online participants, please mute yourself. You have the Slido and you have ETIPWind22 hashtag there where you can log in and pose your questions. We will be able to see them all here and then try to answer them during the discussions or in the Q&A sessions that we'll have at the end of every single session. Here in the room, raise up your voice. You can also put the questions in the slides, but we also have microphones here that we can go around so that we have a very interactive discussion today here. A bit of a safety moment, right? We are in a hotel here, a big room, but there are emergency exits when we go out here, to our left and to our right. So there are people here from Wind Europe and from hotel staff that can help us to evacuate as quickly and as safely as possible out of the room. So please follow them in case of any emergencies. Nothing is planned today, as far as I know, in terms of tests. So therefore, if something happens, then most likely it's something that we need to evacuate, and then we will follow the qualified staff to get us out. So a few words about ETIPWind. Many of you know what it is, some of you don't know what it is. So again, it is the European Technology and Innovation Platform for wind. It is one of ETIPs that the European Commission sponsors. There are many others out there on smart networks, on solar, and many other technologies, geothermal and batteries and so forth. And it is really, again, a platform which I find very nice to gather and allow a particular industry to come together, and irrespective of the companies behind, irrespective of the goals and ambitions of various actors, this ETIP platform comes with or provides a kind of unanimous view of what the technology could be to develop a certain industry moving forward and to take that industry to a leadership position, particularly for Europe here. As of this edition of ETIPWind, we have enlarged our steering committee, and we have about 36 experts now, and the new team coming on board is really addressing some aspects of wind that we haven't done before, which is the social impact aspect and the impact on the environment. So we're really looking at the acceptance of wind by the society. We look at impact of wind turbines in the environment and so on. So we bring that expertise also together, as we want to address also these aspects, and not only the technological aspects, how we build better, stronger, more efficient turbine as we did in the past. We work together with ERA here and also with the European Academy for Wind Energy, and they are all part of the steering committee. And then we have the secretariat that is doing a lot of work and basically also organizing this particular event here for all of us to get together. In the steering committee, as I mentioned, you know a lot of these logos here. The most prominent wind industry companies are here, but the same also all the main research institutes across Europe are present. We also have rooms for observers, and some of the observers come and learn what we are doing, listen. They will become members later on if they find the work interesting and relevant for their own institution, or they will just leave and go find another ETIP when probably it's more relevant to their own organization. Given the situation of wind industry, right, and the energy crisis that we have right now in Europe, I think we see a lot of increase in demands for wind to become one of the energy engines of Europe. And by 2030, we expect roughly 500 gigawatts there, which is an increase with the latest numbers from the European Commission of 60 gigawatts. But then by 2050, you see the number, it's tremendous. And the growth that we have from today, where we see in 2021, it's a little bit about close to 200 gigawatt. We need to really take the industry to another level on delivering and installing the amount of energy that is necessary and amount of power that it will be necessary to power our homes in Europe. And it is the right moment for us to really bring that and infuse an extra power in there to make this happen. And at ETIPWind, we, together with the steering committee, discussed a few weeks back in Amsterdam that we are really putting and willing to put our efforts there. And we just discussed with Rosalinde this morning that together with the European Commission, we will try to even find the right catalyzers and catalysts within the member states, in the European Commission, in the industry to make this happen and really achieve this numbers here by 2050, but of course also achieve or even overshoot our milestones in 2030. Sure, numbers are numbers on a slide. I think it's fine, but there are a lot of challenges to get there. Right? Number one, to increase the speed of putting the projects down on ground. That's permitting and permitting rules, where we see that a lot can be shortened time-wise. There is a lot of paperwork, there is a lot of processes for the wind developers to fill in, and that is for me an easy one and a kind of a no-brainer to start addressing as quick as possible. We are coming out of COVID, which created the crisis. Now we have an energy crisis due to the geopolitical situation between Russia and Ukraine there. This supply chain has been disrupted twice. It didn't recover after COVID and got yet another disruption. So really have bottlenecks in the supply chain, being with raw materials, but also being with manufacturing and all parts being or getting assembled in different parts. So this also needs to be addressed relatively quickly. And a lot of companies are doing that simply because they cannot deliver otherwise, but still there will be many other things that we can do as a community to get there. And then from a system perspective, right, the other challenge is, yes, we put the wind out there and the numbers are impressive and it's good for the wind industry itself, but we also need to make sure, and we have the duty to make sure that that wind power reaches our homes. And we just don't put it out there and end up as a strand assets. So this is through the electrification of loads. We see already the takeoff in electrification of transportation. A lot of industrial players are looking to electrify a lot of their processes. Heating and cooling sectors are bringing up heat pumps and air conditioning to deal with decarbonization also on that particular sector. So we need to work beyond the wind industry with other stakeholders to make sure that, number one, the policies to support this electrification is there, the technologies to enable that electrification, and particularly the grid infrastructure to deliver offshore wind to homes in Europe is there, and then we have by 2050 a fully decarbonized energy system. Together with the steering committee and of ETIPWind, we have worked on the mega trends in wind energy technology. I will not mention this to detail here, but of course, as I mentioned earlier, scaling up, and particularly on offshore, we need to get that. The numbers are there to be reached, and there is a lot of increase of efficiencies for the offshore business. Capacity factors are much higher. There are a lot of pioneers already operating offshore assets, but we need to scale that up. There is one aspect of offshore wind which is floating, which needs further technology investments to make floating solutions productized and available then for the industry to use. And as I mentioned earlier, also the happy coexistence of wind with the environment and society, it's something that we will put new in the agenda and we will focus on so that we get more adoption of wind energy, particularly on land and in some countries where this is not already adopted. Repowering, it's yet another aspect where we could utilize and erecting new and more modern, more efficient and bigger power turbines instead of the very old one, which are already 20, 25 or even some of them 30 years old. So that's one leg where we could also look for growth there. And very important for wind industry is that we are not making just green electrons that decarbonize the rest of the society, but we also want to make the turbines to be 100% circular. That means no waste created out of the turbines, and there are a lot of efforts in here around the companies to make the blade circular, to make the tower circular, everything, the electrical equipment, foundations, and so on, even the deliveries. So these are some of our challenges, but at the same time is a commitment of this team and the companies and the people behind it to actually go and do it. So what we do, I think we are just meeting. We are not just meeting and having fun. We are meeting and discuss. We are meeting and try to really sit down, create workshops and understand what will be the right technologies to get us on that path. What will be the challenges we have? How do we resolve that challenges? How do we team together to really drive solutions for those challenges? And of course, then we publicate that. We have also our interactions, regular interaction with the European Commission, where we are also advising on what will be the right investment levels here. And this comes out into our publication about a wind technology roadmap for Europe. And it's one of our flagship reports, but we also do dedicated reports for specific topics, as I mentioned earlier. And then, of course, collaboration is very important for us. Engaging with the stakeholders is not only the wind industry that is on spot here, is the all other industry that I mentioned. Dissemination, communication, and it's also important to make then the rest of the society aware about the opportunity that we have, first of all, but also the possibilities that this industry brings to Europe itself. This is how the roadmap looks like. I won't bother you with it. I think you can find it online. And then we just quickly can ramp up on what we plan to do this year, right? So as usual, providing this timely and targeted research and innovation recommendation to the European Commission. This is always in our contract there with the European Commission we need to do. And I think, as I mentioned, probably 3-4 times already this morning, we will do it. But here we want to go beyond European Commission. We want to engage with the national policymakers, right? And to also take, maybe we will take a technology angle, but maybe you, Rosalind, will help us taking a political angle and come and try to also convince the national policymakers to really implement the programs at the national level. And I think there are many champions countries in Europe that are already, they don't need this, but there are many countries there we need to do this to make the wind accepted technology for power generation. We will continue to disseminate, right, the priorities of the industry and raise awareness about the needs in research and innovations to keep that leadership position. Let's not forget that once you are a champion, you remain forever a champion. It's even more difficult to stay a champion than become a champion. So I think that will be a continuous need to invest there and be on top. Right? Other ATIPs are also very important stakeholders that we have for the collaboration on the set plan, and of course then we will need to look also how do we develop the finance and sustainability of this platform beyond the current grant that we have for the European Commission, and possibly become more self-sustainable. With that, maybe a little bit of a long and possibly too technical or too deep for some of you list of activities what we do here at ETIPWind, but I hope it gives an overview, right, or of what the opportunities are, number one, and how we as a platform can work together with the stakeholders to deliver on the ambitions that the Europe has. And with that, I would like to invite on stage Rosalind Waardevlies from the European Commission, and will tell us a little bit more from the European Commission perspective about the dreams and about the plans and so on. Rosalind, stage is yours.
And thank you very much for this really very interesting and a great scene setter for today. Let me start by congratulating ETIP for organizing this event, bringing us together, and of course also for all the very important work and impressive work that has been done in the past years. And I'm going to thank you already in advance for all the amazing work that you will be doing in the coming years. Because I think, you know, the wind is blowing in our sails in the right direction, but we need to make sure that we make the wind even blow harder in order to accelerate and scale up, because we have huge challenges, of course, in the European Union. So this morning I will tell you a bit more about the general political context, even though I'm sure most of you here are already aware about it. And then I will zoom in a bit more about the priorities that we have for research and innovation. And then I will end with some wishes for future collaboration with ETIP in the coming months and years. So let's start with the more general political context. And there I have to start with what we call in our Brussels bubble our motor and our compass. And I hope everybody knows what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the European Green Deal. Because the European Green Deal, actually, it is a very big deal. Because with the European Green Deal, the European Commission has set the objective for the European Union to become the first climate-neutral continent in the whole world by 2050. And this is a huge ambition. And also, I'm really very, very pleased to see that this is really a longer-term political strategy. Because what you often see with politicians, don't quote me on this, is that, you know, there is a bit of short-termism there. So I think it's really great that now, you know, we have this really longer-term strategic political agenda with very clear targets that we want to achieve 2030, 2050, because this really provides us a very good and stable framework to continue working together. So then came the pandemic, and then many colleagues of mine, they said, okay, now we can forget about this European Green Deal because this is all about reducing greenhouse gas emissions. I mean, who cares about greenhouse gas emissions? We have a huge health crisis. The good news is that, okay, these kind of fears fortunately were unfounded, and the European Green Deal remained, you know, really the strategy for the European Union, and basically we use it also as a strategy to build back better, as we call it in politics. This is a really nice, catchy slogan, right? We're going to build back better with this European Green Deal and with our strategic directions really unchanged. And then, of course, we had the huge current situation where we are in with the unprovoked war in Ukraine and the related energy crisis. And again, there were some colleagues coming to me and say, okay, now we can really forget about it because, you know, now we have this huge energy crisis, you know, people are really getting worried about affordability of energy, so we can forget, you know, about the European Green Deal. We now need to focus more short term. And again, I'm really happy to say that the European Green Deal remains, of course, our strategic priority, because you can really see that, our focus on the longer-term sustainability, which is a necessity. I mean, it's an imperative. And for me, it was really a wake-up call when a few weeks ago I was sitting in a panel, an international panel, and there was also a young climate activist. And we were there, with colleagues from different parts of the world, and I was proudly presenting our European Green Deal. I said, we in the European Union, we have this really clear strategy. We are very ambitious. We want to be the first climate-neutral continent in the world by 2050. And then the young climate activist took the microphone, looked at me and said, did you just use the word ambitious? Your European strategy is actually an absolute necessity. I mean, without this, we will not survive. So don't call this ambitious. This is purely necessary. This is the minimum you have to do. And for me, it was kind of like a wake-up call because, when I'm presenting, especially in the international context, I'm always really proud, and we're so ambitious in the European Union. And it was kind of like, a really nice perspective to get this wake-up call from the younger generation also to say, well, don't say that you are ambitious. You have to do this. This is the absolute necessity for the survival of our planet and of humanity. So having said that, I think, for me, the conclusion is that sustainability goes hand in hand with competitiveness, and it also goes hand in hand with energy security and affordability. So with our sustainability agenda, if you want, we are killing many birds with one stone, and this is why it's so important to have this common strategic direction for the European Union. It has also helped us in the European Commission to even work better together with colleagues in different departments. And I think this is all about, breaking silos, collaboration across different sectors, across different stakeholder groups. And I think this is also what ETIP has been showing in the past years. It's really to bring together a community. And my wish for ETIP is that, your community will still grow. I mean, you mentioned you will have some observers now. And my wish is really that the membership of ETIP will grow even further, because I really believe that we have to work together in order to really accelerate and deliver on our ambition, or as others would put it, the necessity for the European Union to move forward. Now, I need to say a few words about Horizon Europe, because we are very proud to say that we have the biggest publicly funded framework program for research and innovation in the whole world. There is no public administration in the world that has a bigger program for research and innovation. We have 95.5 billion euros that we can invest in our 7-year multi-annual framework period. And with our investments in research and innovation, with our new program, Horizon Europe, we basically made 3 important changes, if you want, compared to previous framework program. The first important change is that now we have been very implicitly focused on impact and contributing to our policy objectives. So this is meaning that we, with our investment in research and innovation, we are aligning to the regulatory framework, and in particular in the context of the European Green Deal, we have the Fit for 55 package, which in law puts legally binding targets, for example, on renewable energies. So what we want to do with our investment in research and innovation, we really want to contribute also to compliance with the regulatory framework. So clear linkage between research and innovation activity and policy. The second change is that we have sharpened our instruments in Horizon Europe. We have built new instruments, which we call our Horizon Europe missions. I hope that some of you at least have heard of the missions. We have 5 of them. I will just highlight one of them, which is closest to my heart, which is the cities mission. Because with these missions, we really set ourselves very clear targets. With the cities mission, we want to have at least 100 climate-neutral cities in the European Union by 2030. We have selected these 100 cities out of 377 cities that applied for it. They are fortunately spread in all member states, even though for some member states it was a bit more difficult to find a lot of interested cities to join this adventure than others, but we have countries in each member state. And the novelty of this instrument is that we basically take a bottom-up approach. So not top-down, we are not telling the cities what to do, but we will be listening to the cities. We take the cities' need as a starting point, and we are co-creating with the local communities the solutions that these particular cities need in order to become climate neutral by 2030. And I think it's this societal dimension that is so important to be successful in our transitions. And this is why our framework program for research and innovation is no longer focusing only on the technology, but also on non-technological innovations, in particular the societal dimension. And I was very happy, Adrian, that you also mentioned, the societal dimension also in your work. The third important change, if you want, of the framework program is that we are focusing much more on synergies with other programs, with other funding opportunities at the European level. And in particular, it's really important that we are combining the research and development phase also then with the deployment phase later on. So we really want to make sure that we don't only have the necessary technologies ready, that the technologies that we have become more efficient, but also that we can scale them up, commercialize them at a bigger speed than before. So this is a huge challenge that we are facing, but this is really built in our framework program to foster these synergies between research and deployment and then the development and scaling up afterwards. Now, I don't need to convince you about how important wind energy is for the strategic objectives of the European Union. And together, with the work that you are doing in ETIP, we are very committed to support the industry in accelerating, in scaling up for the future. So you are very well aware, of course, that we are in the process of developing the new work program in Cluster 5 of Horizon Europe. And let me just highlight 4 priorities that we have, which very much coincide with, of course, the priorities identified by ETIP. I would just highlight the 4 of them. First of all, I think on the technological side, it will be very important to improve efficiency and bring down the cost, both at the turbine level and at the system level. The second priority is that we want to make a better use of the resources geographically. So here, of course, we are looking also at the floating wind options. The third priority is linked to the whole concern about the raw materials availability and supply chain. So we are looking very much into circularity and recyclability. The European Commission in general will come forward with a new package, a new policy package on circularity by the end of November. So I think all the activities of the wind sector that are linked to circularity and recyclability will fit very well also, with this new policy package that is coming out. And lastly, unsurprisingly, it's the societal dimension. So societal engagement, acceptance, but also linked to the skills agenda, because of course we also need to make sure that we have the right skills in the European Union. But what we really want to achieve, of course, is that we will be remaining a technological leader in the European Union. This is extremely important, and here research and innovation is really needed to help there. We want to make sure that we take into account the societal dimension, the environmental impact dimension, and of course we want to deliver on the 35% of wind energy by 2030. And hopefully even overshoot it, as you said. But I think this is a very clear target. So I think it will be extremely important to collaborate much closer, to bring in even more stakeholders in ETIP, to cover the entire value chain, because I think, if we really want to accelerate and deliver, we need to cover the entire value chain. We need to also work with other groups, with other industries to really accelerate. And in this context, and then I will stop because I see colleagues are getting a bit nervous. I think we are running out of time. That was very subtle. So the last thing I want to mention, and I would really like to encourage and mobilize you, because at the moment we are in the process in the European Commission to look again at the set plan. And we want to revamp the set plan. We want to make it more strategic, more political, more focused. The set plan is doing amazing work through the implementation working groups. But I studied the set plan when I was applying for the job I have now. And I looked at the website. I was like, wow, this is really great because it's really concrete, etc. But then I started to read all the targets and I was counting them at a certain moment. I was a bit bored. There are more than 100 concrete targets of the set plan. But then, of course, if you want to sell this to your political masters, your political bosses, then I always, my trick is always to do the elevator pitch, so if I want to talk to my commissioner, I'm practicing an elevator pitch. So can I bring a message across, just in like 1-2 minutes? So with the set plan, I didn't manage because there are like over 100 targets. So I think we have a great opportunity for the revamp of the set plan to define some overarching objectives. and to define really a common strategic research and innovation agenda between the Commission, the private side, and also the member states. But then to get this political buy-in from the member states as well. Because I do believe it will be very important that we converge even further when it comes to research and innovation investments. The investment opportunities we have at EU level, I mean, they are there, but they are limited. And I think, we need to not spread our eggs in too many baskets. I'm getting into an Easter mood now, but we really need to focus. And I think through the revamp of the set plan, the word of ETIP, we can really make this happen. So I would invite you to please participate in the ongoing stakeholder consultation. This is open until the 2nd of November. We really want to hear from you, from your views, how we can really focus, become more strategic to make sure that there will be even a stronger wind blowing in our sails so we can move forward faster together. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rosalind, and thank you to Adrian. We have planned for, can I get the mic? Yeah. We have planned for a fireside chat based on what you just presented. Mindful of time, I want to make it also very active and dynamic. You mentioned all of the challenges that we have, Adrian, in front of us. You also mentioned some of the solutions that the European Commission is bringing. What is the role, specifically, that you are foreseeing for the group of experts that you have in the room, that you have in the online meeting? What is the role of ETIPWind that you expect us to play in the set plan?
Thank you very much. Well, I mean, I think the first role, and I think ETIP has already played an extremely important role and has already been extremely helpful to basically co-design and co-define, the common strategic priorities for research and innovation, which I think is extremely important. So I hope and I expect ETIP to continue to do that. But on top of that, I think it will be very important to also look at synergies, at potential collaborations, in particular in the context of the set plan with other implementation working groups. And also, I think it will be extremely important to bring in also more buy-in from the member states so that we can really have this common agenda also endorsed by the national governments. And there, we are very committed also from the Commission to really work together. So this becomes really a joint research and innovation agenda for Europe that is endorsed by you, by the Commission and by the member states. I think that will be very important. And the third thing I would like to mention is really this societal dimension. I think here, we have, a great opportunity to work together to also take into account the societal dimension, the engagement, acceptance, etc. Because in the end, I think if we can only be successful in the energy transition is if also we have our citizens on board.
No, absolutely. And I think you made a very good point about bringing everybody in together. It's not only meeting the ambitious targets or the needed targets that we have, but also ensuring that we do it in a sustainable, inclusive way. So the question for you, Adrian, is then, throughout all these years, ETIPWind has been doing this extremely good work. You have provided a set of documents with priorities. How crucial has been having this relation with the European Commission, with policymakers, for you to deliver? How crucial it's been, and why is it still needed?
Well, I think we all recognize, right, that it's very, very crucial to have the support of European Commission, in particularly funding, number one, innovation, to allow us to take technologies from a very concept phase, TRL 1, 2, right, ideas on paper or minds of some of us in this room and some of us online or people out there, and really bring them up into being today industrialized solutions that provide clean energy for Europe. And this has been through all the horizon and all the public funding that has been available, has developed a lot of such solutions in the wind industry. I mentioned earlier, right, that the same level of investments and then also the policy associated with this level of investments allowed investors to come in the wind industry and take this and industrialize and create from what is known as backyards energy sources in even the Netherlands, but also Denmark and Northern Germany, right, and making a leading industry, right, in the world, has been, hand in hand managed by the right policies with the right investment in the technology. And I think, as I mentioned earlier, right, we are today the champions in wind. Let's make sure we stay there, right, and this will require even more, right, investment into making sure that we are at the cutting edge of technologies. We are taking the wind always to the next step, and we put the right policies in, and we gain the right speed also to achieve our targets. So for me, this is very critical, not only up to now that we have achieved the status, but it's also very critical moving forward to remain there.
We're going to be hearing more about what needs to be done if we need to remain as a champion in the next panel. And just mindful about time, I would like to basically shortcut a little bit this discussion and just jump straight to a very direct question. How the European Commission, what is your commitment, Rosalind, to this group? What is your 3 main commitments that you can do to the European wind industry in terms of support to continue stay as a champion? Because we are there, how can we keep becoming and staying as a champion?
Okay, very good. Well, first of all, I mean, of course, we want the European wind industry to be the champion. And from the research and innovation perspective, we will do everything we can to support. So the first thing I would say is that, we would be extremely happy to define a very strong common strategic agenda for research and innovation for Europe, which also has the buy-in from all the member states. And I think here we can also use the set plan to, kickstart this and link it to the activities of the European research area, where also the member states in a high-level forum are discussing priorities. So I think this is the first thing that will be very important. The second thing from the research and innovation perspective is that we are also very committed to support accelerating deployment. It's linked to the synergies that I mentioned before. And here, I mean, I know that there are many bottlenecks that hamper deployment. One of them, for example, is the long permitting that you mentioned before. And I mean, innovation, as I said in the beginning, in the meaning of the framework program, is not only technological, it's also societal, but also innovation in governance. And there, I think it will be very important, and we are a big advocate of having regulatory sandboxes, because the regulatory sandboxes at national level would provide a bit more like of an experimentation zone to accelerate innovations to be brought to the market. So we would be really very happy supporting their members in order to have this experimentation and regulatory sandboxing. And finally, of course, another big stumbling block, the disruptive supply chain and raw materials. Of course, there we are supporting this from the research and innovation side as well. And lastly, again, I think, the whole skills agenda for Europe, knowing that next year will be the European Year of Skills. This is definitely something that I think will be on top of our political agenda as well, and very happy to look into how we can together work on this. But I think, what I would really like to do, I mean, is to also change a mindset. It's not kind of like, the Commission telling you or telling the member states what to do. I think we should really, see this, that we are, all on the same boat. There is no captain that says, now we go left, now we go right. I think, we are all there, or we are all captains, basically. But I think we should really, for the future moving forward, think about it this way, that we are a team and we are collaborating in the interest of the European Union, in the interest of the competitiveness of the industry. And I think that is really the way forward.
That is then just fair to say to Adrian, it's an equal voting, it's an equal commitment. What are your commitments, and as a chair of ETIPWind, to the European Commission, to the community going forward?
Well, I think I can talk on behalf of ETIP when we say we will provide the same, technical expertise and support as we did in the past, probably even better moving forward. We will expand, as I mentioned earlier in my presentation, beyond just pure technical and move into the innovation and address also the societal aspects that you have mentioned, Rosalind, which I think I also find it very important. And I think we recognize this, and we discuss also in the steering committee that addressing the member states is an important vehicle for us to make wind industry more successful in Europe. So it's one of your pain points out there that you mentioned a few times. So you will get our support on that one as well.
Okay, well, with that, I would like to wrap up. Thank you very much to both of you. And please join me with an applause for our two panelists. And then I will call the next panel to come to stage, please.
Thank you.
And the next panel, as I mentioned, is going to discuss what are the policies that are needed to keep Europe's supply chain competitiveness. They're going to be moderated by the Chief Policy Officer of Wind Europe, Pierre Tardoux. And I will let him to make the necessary introductions. Pierre, over to you.
Thank you very much, Ivan. Why don't you sit here, Jacek, Didier, Bert. Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Thanks a lot for being with us today. A lot's been said, so before we kick off here on the competitiveness of the wind supply chain and the role of research and innovation in it, I just want to highlight a huge paradox that we're confronted with at the moment. Adrian, Rosaline both clarified that the compass and the motor of the EU is the European Green Deal. This is great. It's never been more important in the particular time that we're in, with the Ukraine war having really shown a really bright light on the fact that imported fossil fuels simply don't deliver the reliable, clean, and competitive energy that Europeans want, right? Therefore, Europe really needs to double down on its investment in homegrown energy, homegrown renewables. The objective set out in Repower EU, 510 gigawatts of wind by 2030, is daunting in a certain sense, but it's the right thing to do. So Europe has never needed wind more than it does today. At the same time, the European wind supply chain is struggling. Turbine manufacturers haven't been making money for a long time now, since even before COVID. We've got two representatives of the European wind supply chain here on the panel, so thank you very much for shedding light on this. And we really need to crack this nut because there's a huge opportunity. We've been saying wind is Europe is a global champion on wind. But staying at the top is the hardest part, and there's potentially a huge missed opportunity if we let the supply chain go, to have a Green Deal indeed delivered, signed and delivered by 2050, but a Green Deal that is not made in Europe, and in a certain sense, the very essence of the Green Deal would be lost in that process. Obviously, research and innovation has a huge part to play in Europe staying ahead of the curve and staying at the top. And so I'm very happy to be joined by you three gentlemen to discuss that this morning. So let me quickly introduce the three of you. Jacek Truszyński, Deputy Head of Units at DG Grow. Thank you very much for joining us. Didier Mailleux, Solutions Manager for Renewables at Hitachi Energy. Thank you, Didier. And Bert Verdijk, Head of Product Portfolio at ZF Wind Power. Thank you, gentlemen. So let's start with you, Jacek. Thanks for your presence. And I'd like to also highlight the big involvement of the European Commission in this event. So thank you very much already for that. It shows the support from across the House for this very important work. This is really about research and innovation being embedded in industrial policy, right? And I just wanted to hear, just to get us started, Jacek, how do you envision industrial policy at the European Commission, and what role do you think the EU needs to play in bolstering the competitiveness of the European wind supply chain?
Thank you, Pierre. Is it working?
Yes, it is.
Thank you, Pierre, and it's a pleasure to be here this morning. Well, I would say that in the industrial policy of the Commission on green technologies, including wind, is quickly evolving, and it's driven by events. Because you mentioned the conflict in Ukraine, there was COVID with the disruption of the supply chain. So, the things that we have been taking for granted for many years, like seamless supply chains across the globe, we cannot take it for granted anymore. So we have to develop this strategic autonomy that my Commissioner Breton, has been emphasizing for many times. That's the first element of the context. The second element of the context is that we see that our green policies so far have been really, let's say, narrowly defined. They have been really consumer-oriented. If you talk about the auctions, for example, for wind power. And of course, this has brought many benefits to the consumers, but because of this narrow definition, we are facing also some really strange situations today in Europe, where we have to expand massively the production capacity of wind, including the supply chain. All major OEMs are loss-making. So something is not right and needs to be rebalanced, let's say. And so this is the context of this new industrial policy that we are developing together with your sector. And let me just say 2 words about the specific means through which we will be deploying this industrial policy. The first element is permitting. That was already mentioned previously. This is the main challenge. It's a challenge. Slow permitting is a challenge for our climate objectives, but it's equally a challenge for our industrial strength in that sector. And that has been clearly acknowledged by the Commission. And this is why we have made in May those proposals for member states to speed up permitting. We do not want to wait, of course, for the legislative proposals to be negotiated, adopted, and then implemented. And this is why we have already started working with member state authorities as part of specific working groups to already implement those solutions that we have proposed in the legal act. And this work is accelerating. So that's the first thing, permitting. The second, financing. We already heard a lot about R&D financing here today. I think, my experience also working with the solar sector is that where we are strong is on R&D financing, but where we lack strength often is how to scale it up. And I think there, what we notably in DG GROW, my department of the Commission, will be working on is to try to push member states towards dedicating a part of those huge recovery funds under the Recovery and Resilience Facility towards supporting scaling up production. So that's the second thing. The third thing, procurement. I mentioned that the green policy has been so far really geared towards, let's say, prices only, and that has negative impact on the industry. And so there we will be working on a guidance. When member states set up auctions for clean power, how to best design it to have a, let's say, more balanced approach in terms of procuring that equipment and that power. Not price only, but also other elements that are very important to us, like recyclability, services to the community, and so on. So this is the third work stream. The fourth work stream, and the last one I wanted to mention, is supply chains. Early next year, we'll be issuing a Critical Raw Materials Act, a legislative proposal to strengthen our access to critical raw materials, including those used in permanent magnets. And we also need to work with DigiTrade to review, in a strategic way, our trade policy. If you talk about accessing to glass fiber, is the system working for the industry currently? Where are we today, and where do we want to be in 5 and 10 years? So all this needs to be deployed as part of a comprehensive package, and we will be working with you on doing that. Thank you.
Thanks a lot for that very comprehensive overview. I'd like to turn to you, Didier, for taking a bit of a step back. Where does Europe fit in the global picture? For the equipment that you make, what are the global markets that are actually attracting investments? And is Europe doing what it needs to in order to attract investments in the wind supply chain, specifically for the products that you make? And maybe you can quickly describe what those products are for those who aren't necessarily familiar with what Hitachi Energy does.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so I'm representing here the electrical and electronic supply chain. So all equipments which not only connect wind farms and wind turbines to the grid, but also reinforce the grid so that it can swallow those enormous amount of energy coming from wind. For us, let's say, what we see as very promising markets are offshore wind, clearly and greatly, and grid reinforcement. So there are two. Why offshore wind? And that's a game changer, because for the first time, we can build scale. That means 1 gigawatt, 2 gigawatt, even more wind farms not at the expense of the supply chain. So not by really squeezing the wind vendors with international competition, because scale is really in the project itself. So, and thanks to the pioneering vision of some countries, founded on the European vision, Nordic countries, Belgium, my country, Netherlands, UK. So we could already build a great set of references and the corresponding supply chain for offshore wind and grid reinforcement. And we see now that we have a chance to export that technology to North America, which is coming full speed towards wind, and Asia, of course. And the future will be, of course, Latin America and Africa. So a lot of projects there. So that's really the two focus. In terms of grid reinforcement, there is a bit of frustration because I haven't seen yet a good study how the grid would look like as a European grid incorporating all those renewables. So it goes a bit beyond wind. It's wind and solar. Imagine you produce wind in the north or on the western part, and solar more in the south. So how do you do it? For the moment, the interconnection project that we see are more initiatives of countries, but it's not enough. So we see a lot of interconnection, which allows us to lead the pack in HVDC, high voltage direct current connection, for example, but we need more than that. So a bit like the European Union has built highways to connect Europe, railways to connect Europe, so we need the same for electrons. So maybe with the same kind of funding mechanism, not just leaving it to the market, doesn't work well. For investing in the supply chain, first we do it, thanks to those pioneering countries. So we have a lot of factories delivering transformers, converters, circuit breakers for wind. But of course, the big thing to expand the capacity, what you are doing as well, is a simple business case. And in the business case, it's not the what, which is the most important. Everybody knows the what, the kind of transformers we need, the kind of equipment, the kind of wind turbines. We know the size of the wind turbines, all that we know. We can do them, but it's the when. And investment will just happen when you have some security of a certain volume coming. And there, if there was a very interesting study of IRENA where they use the KPI megawatts installed per project per year to see how long it takes from the decision to the auction, I would say, to delivery of power. And there is a huge variety between countries there. So to decrease the variety, that means we need to identify all obstacles to projects. You mentioned a few of them. And my last point, so I would like to insist also to promoting the European quality. So we have great success stories in the energy in Europe in hydropower and nuclear, because we have hydropower plants running or dams for more than 50 years and even 100 years. We could do it, we could do it lasting. Nuclear power plants, most could be extended by 25% with a lot of benefits for the consumers in Europe. We need to promote our quality, that we are not investing in infrastructure which is just going to finish after 25 years. Adrian mentioned repowering. We must really show the difference in terms of reliability, efficiency, sustainability, safety that our solutions are bringing compared to maybe cheaper solutions from other countries.
Thank you very much. So, Bert, I'd like to stay on this, on the same question here, which is the business case and investing in Europe, right? What are the conditions? Is this working now? Yeah. What are the conditions for you to stay in Europe, to continue investing in Europe, and what is the role of research and innovation in that? No, so Bert, yeah.
So yeah, also from my side, thank you for the invitation. Happy to be here. Well, for us, innovation has always been very important. I think it brought us in the end to being leading in the industry in the world. I think we're today there. It has brought wind in the end to affordable energy. Specifically to our product we make powertrains within the wind turbine, which we have significantly tuned up, let's say, in torque density, what we call, meaning that with less material we can put more power through. In the end, leading to more cost competitiveness, but also taking some logistical challenges away. So their innovation has been really, really important. Now, on the other hand, today we see that that the innovation alone is not enough to have a sustainable supply chain in Europe. So we also face this challenge of keeping production in Europe. We see in principle the disconnect between all these ambitions of Europe on the R&I, but also on the high volumes. But at the same time, I think over the last years, the main focus was really on price pressure, a pure price war, I would call it, and these auction systems, which has led not only the OEMs in very difficult situations today, but also the supply chain. And this has been pushing parts of the supply chain to China and to other parts of the country. So if we really want to keep and act upon wind as being a strategic industry for us, and we need to keep that in Europe, we really need to act on those elements that we can keep also competitive here in Europe, and it will not be only on price. I think wind has been driving, let's say, the costs down significantly. I think we are quite competitive source of energy already. We need to work on these additional elements. That it's not only a pure price war, because that we will never be able to win that. And sustainability, circularity, that's extremely important to guarantee that we can stay in Europe. So I think that's at the same time the biggest challenge we're in front at. I think we are in the front of innovation wise. If you look in the world, we need to continue that for new solutions. But this really high ambition in Europe, and if you look to the OEMs, I think you mentioned it already, the OEMs today making losses. I think many companies in the supply chain have similar challenges. How can a company invest massively into a supply chain if it's not healthy today? So that is the biggest challenge for me for the next, let's say, 1-2 years.
Very clear. Yeah, I mean, price only will not deliver the outcome that we're all looking for. Yeah, in terms of expanding the supply chain, creating jobs and opportunity here in Europe. And so, but you spoke about this, Jacek, already moving away from that. You know, having qualitative criteria in auctions, etc. I'd like to shift to a point that the wind industry has really been struggling with in terms of research and innovation policy over the last years, which has been that there's been the perception by policymakers, well, winds, as you've just said, Bert, is mature. You know, it's a technology that is mature, it's extremely cost competitive, etc. And that has led sometimes to policymakers not really keeping their eye on the ball and thinking, well, we can move on to the next thing. Yeah. When we know that in order to stay ahead of the curve, we need to continue investing in research and innovation, incremental improvements, and there's a sentiment here that it's blatantly obvious to everyone that we need to keep investing in medicine, in automotive, and in aviation, and the same should apply to winds. And I'd like to ask you, Jacek, I mean, how do you perceive this? Do you agree with the statement, and how should this be mainstreamed in European industrial policy?
Thank you. Well, to me also, I think what was clear from the first part of this discussion today is that we should probably first better coordinate basic research and innovation with appropriate support further up the TRLs or down the TRLs. It can be grants, it can be, you know, guarantees for loans and so on. That's the first thing. And the second thing that seems to me that we should do is, and that was also clear from the discussion earlier this morning, that we should define research not only in terms of technology research, but also process innovation, for example. Because here, the challenge we have ahead of us is scale. And and you know, without some support also for optimizing those processes. And for wind, it's clear. I mean, we are moving. If we talk about offshore, we are moving up the scale with the huge installations, and we also have to be more efficient in deploying those solutions. So that's where we need to have a reflection how to best support that. And you know, for example, us in DG Grow, we often talk to DG Competition, who say, you know, state aid, we can provide it, but only for innovation. And the question is how you define innovation. And also there, in the discussions with DG Comp, I think we have to keep on pushing to say it's not only technology innovation, but also process innovation. Because we are in a world, you know, if you look at what is happening in the States with the Inflation Reduction Act, there will be huge subsidies also for manufacturing. I think we should maybe not in Europe just follow this one-to-one, you know, flooding the industry with subsidies, but we have to have this reflection how to, you know, keep the supply chain expanded with the right type of support.
Okay, very clear. This is not in the script, but maybe you want to comment also on support for process innovation as we go ahead. I'd like to come back to you, Bert. I mean, how do you deal with the balance between, you know, innovating and scaling up? Yeah, because innovation is extremely expensive, of course, and you need to recover those innovation costs. So it'd be tempting to say, okay, well, let's stop, yeah, and scale up. But how do you thread that needle?
I think it's a challenge. We will need both in the end. So we cannot stop innovating. I think we have proven over the last decade that the innovation has paid off. But we need more because the scale up, which we are facing, does bring new challenges and does also need new innovations. Not only on the turbine, can be, let's say, floating, can be offshore, can be in the size, but also in the grid, like you mentioned. It's a huge challenge that, let's say, these decentralized new let's say, locations where we will massively produce energy needs to get in the end into the system. So also there, still big innovations or challenges lie for innovations, like also in circularity. So we should not forget that innovation. And as mentioned before, if we want to stay ahead of the market, we are today, but it will be quite fast if we stop on innovation that we will be lagging in the market. So China is really, let's say, at our heels, really close. I think if you compare in China, I think they have the biggest supply chain. They have the biggest turbines today, both onshore, offshore. And technology-wise, we are still heading, but it will not take long if we stop. So I think it's a nice ambition to be ahead, but it takes the effort. In parallel, I would say, yes, we need to scale up. But scaling up for me means mainly we need a healthy industry. If you have a healthy industry with healthy companies in that industry, the scale-up will happen. And the scale-up in first instance, let's say on the midterm, with the technologies we have today on the turbine, if I reflect to our product we have, we can scale up. It's more a matter of investments then, with the products we have today. And of course, then also investing into processes absolutely needed to have efficient processes to make that even better, I would say, to make it more efficient. But I think that in say will not be the biggest challenge. The biggest challenge will have this healthy situation in the industry to be able to scale up.
Very clear. I just want to also highlight to our online audience that if you want to be contributing to the discussion, please don't hesitate to use the Slido to send in questions. I think you have the QR code here on the screen, so please feel free to go ahead with that. I see that there are questions coming in already. So while I look at the questions behind me, Didier, can you comment on that same question, innovation versus scaling up?
Yeah, so clearly I agree, most of the technology is ready and ready for a certain scale up, especially on bottom fixed offshore wind, for example. But still there is a big one which is missing, which is floating offshore wind. Floating is required for 70% of the offshore wind potential, and for countries along the southern Atlantic coast or Mediterranean, absolutely a must. And that's feasible. That requires to bring on the table also other players like yards, which is also a good opportunity for Europe. But this, for me, is a big one. Another one is, of course, in the grid reinforcement, when power electronics is a really good one to really build a strong industrial base in Europe for converters, for HVDC, for all those things. We still have also storage, so energy storage, which needs some innovation, goes hand in hand with wind. And in digital and life cycle management tools as well, like for resilience. So if we are leading the pack in terms of optimizing life cycle costs, because for me still cost matters, but not CapEx, LCOE, TCO, and there we can make a difference. We can show our turbines are better, our solutions are better. And last but not least, so investment in technology is not only in innovation. So we all, the oldest of us, remember the trauma of the solar industry, where everything was there, set up in Europe in terms of technology, first industrial pilots, and was just stopped because scale could not be brought on the industrial chain. Investing in mega factories, investing in industrial automation, in industrial IoT, very, very differentiating technologies still matters. And there we need scale to justify those investments in R&D as well. So scale and innovation go hand in hand when we speak of the industrialization of our invention. There are so many inventions in Europe which were scaled up elsewhere because we were lacking the skills of industrializing.
All right, so that's a pretty sobering statement, but good to keep in mind. I'd like to state, you were talking about the grids, and I'd like to, there's a question here from the audience about the seeming disconnect between the need to directly electrify a lot of our energy uses to go climate neutral. We know that electrification is really going to be the main driver for decarbonization. And the fact that Europe has been underinvesting in its electricity grids for quite a few years now. So the last ETIPWind report actually established that Europe needs to be investing twice as much in its electricity grids as it does today. How, Jacek, can the Commission help steady that ship a little bit?
Well, I must say I'm not an expert here of investments in the grids. I know that the Commission, through programs such as the Connecting Europe facility, has been supporting investments, but that's mainly for the big interconnectors between member states. Probably here we have an issue also of the grids that have to be deployed at a lower level. But we see it also in our work. We see the problems with the grids, with the fact that in the Netherlands people receive subsidies for installing solar PV on their rooftops, and then it's curtailed because the grid cannot support it. So I think that there is awareness among the Commission departments that this is something that needs to be addressed. But this is, I would say, more a question to DG Energy than DG Grow.
Okay, so I would like to give you a DG Grow question. Yes, raw materials. One of the things that has been abundantly clear in the discussions this morning and has been over the last few months is really Europe needing to address its over-reliance on strategic raw materials from very few geographies. You have a consultation out on the Raw Materials Act. So what are you hoping to receive from the industry on that?
Thanks, Pierre. So indeed, I mean, this is a key policy proposal for our department of the Commission. That was something that the President in her annual address to the Parliament emphasized, and is part of this broader debate on strengthening our strategic autonomy. If you talk about permanent magnets used by your sector and automotive and other sectors as well, we rely today 90% on China, and that is something that I think that we absolutely need to change. So we are working on this proposal for a Critical Raw Materials Act. We want to table it early next year. Indeed, there's an ongoing public consultation. What we look for is evidence, basically, and good ideas. So we, as always, we have to draft an impact assessment, and for that impact assessment, we need good evidence. And we, there are many policy ideas floating around on how we could strengthen this specific sector. And there, that would be a key element that we expect from the public consultation. Just to mention a few elements that we look for example, how to strengthen our monitoring capacity for these critical raw materials, how to facilitate their extraction and processing. We know that in the EU this is a big issue, how to do it in a socially and environmentally acceptable way. What are the key barriers for developing that sector? What are the challenges across the value chain in terms of financing or, for example, lack of availability of certain standards? Circularity, also a big topic here. Is the product legislation that we have currently in place fit for purpose in that specific context? And the final aspect is international. We want to increase our capacity to extract and process those materials in the EU, but we will still be relying on our, let's say, friendly partners. And there are also questions how to best structure that, how to ensure that we have access to those materials from overseas. Thank you.
All right, very clear. So I'd like to go to the first question here, the most popular question. Well, it's changing by the second, but still. So I see there's a question on airborne winds that has more to do perhaps with the societal engagements. So perhaps that can be dealt with in the second panel. I'd like to stick with the one on building more factories in Europe, right? Where are the investments going to come from? My understanding from the two of you is that if there's scale, if there's visibility, there's a rationale. There's going to be a business case to invest. Would this be a fair way to capture it?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and it has a revenue aspect and a cost aspect that you covered rightfully. So we need a solid supply chain for raw material, and this enormous amount of raw material which is needed. But I also want to comment a bit on the grid reinforcement, because when I was still working for the Belgian TSO, we had an emergency case where an imbalance between wind and nuclear, wind in northern Germany and in Nordic countries, and nuclear in France, was putting the Belgian grid at risk. And really, we counted the time to blackout. And the reaction was, okay, we must be protected against such an event. So let's put a fact, so a device, an electronic device, which limits the power which can flow through Belgium so that it goes elsewhere. So this is not okay. This is not what we need. We need really to have more power flows from the region where we produce renewable energy to the balancing power to the storage. So it's a new way of planning grids which goes as was mentioned by Rosalind, a teamwork between the countries to see where are those highways needed, and let's build them with a right financing mechanism. Yeah.
Great. Bert, finally on that question of investing in new production capacity.
Yeah, I think it's a matter of plain economics. Is the business case is good, the investment will come, but that counts for the whole supply chain in the end. So it goes from the developers until the last component manufacturer. So nobody will scale up if they don't have a healthy business case. So I think it's quite simple, but the main challenge, and visibility on what comes, what are the volumes, by what time, are we sure that, let's say, the permitting, that the volumes will actually be there? Yeah, that's the first prerequisite to have this transparency and to have some certainty on that business case.
Okay, and final question to the two of you from the industry side. What is the one technological challenge that you would like ETIP to solve over the next periods that would help actually the ramp up of renewables?
Well, I'm not sure whether it's a technological challenge, to be honest. I think I would like to see that we in ETIP, together with the whole industry, can really make that the wind industry is seen as a strategic industry for Europe to stay in Europe. with this full supply chain, with products made in Europe, to also have this renewable energy, but also independent from, let's say, independent energy not made by companies outside of Europe. So for me, that would be the main importance, and there are many aspects to that. I think mapping that out, what is needed for that, it goes partly in the legislation, what's needed for legislation to support the energy sector in that, but also in the innovations. I think we talked about grid on offshore, so I think that putting that puzzle together, making that transparent towards the European Commission, but also to the member states in the end, because I see there's still also sometimes a gap. You have the Commission with good ideas and good ambitions, but in the end it needs to dribble down fully into all the member states to make it really happen. And I think that's, for me, a big focus in that point to jointly work on that plan.
Okay, thank you very much, Bert. Didier, one challenge for the ETIPWind.
Yeah, so I will not take floating wind, offshore wind, because it's already good, and we have, let's say, tailwinds. The fact that big countries like the US need that technology, so we will develop it. So I will really take this advocacy for a grid reinforcement, that we because there are still a lot of lobbies that are countering, that are bashing wind power. Huh? So you have, of course, the gas lobby. You have also, in France, the nuclear lobby. So giving the message first, yeah, there is enough energy for anything we dream of. So electrification of everything is ample enough energy with wind, and it's true, really. Demonstrate it, show it, and then show the feasibility of this integration into the European grid, really by studies and by teaming up the various renewable power sources and also the conventional ones that could complement, and the storage ones. So show that it's feasible, and we have a group doing this, and they did it for Poland, for example. Poland has an ambitious target for offshore wind and wind, and we just calculate the price of electricity based on those investments in the future, including balancing power and storage for the next 25 years hourly. And we show the price of electricity going up first because of this crisis of gas, and then coming down to the same level. So that means it's feasible. It's not, let's say, that, okay, if you do wind, you will have intermittency, and some days you will not have electricity. So on one country, we have it, we have in other countries, but this study for Europe is not there, or the good argument for Europe is not there. I would take this one as a target. Yeah.
All right, very clear. So showing that climate neutrality with very high shares of variable renewables is absolutely doable. And if I link it back to what you were saying before, it's also a huge industrial opportunity, a potential for growth, jobs, and opportunity for Europeans, which is the essence of the European Green Deal. All right, thank you very much, gentlemen. Please join me in thanking our panel.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. And it's my pleasure now to introduce the next panel session, in which we are going to talk about how to accelerate the wind turbine recycling and circularity, and as well as improving the coexistence of wind energy with nature and society. And for this, I'm very happy to introduce Elena Solman from the Wageningen University. Thank you for moderating the panel. I'll give the floor to you so you can introduce our panelists. Thank you.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much all for listening in the second part of the panel today. We have very interesting guests who know a lot about both the production and the use of wind turbines. And we are zooming into a very difficult and possibly one of the key challenges, I think, of our times in energy transition on wind energy. And that is the social and environmental aspects, because, well, we know a lot about the technological progress, but some of the social and environmental challenges are really the key of achieving and increasing societal acceptance, but also making sure, indeed, that, well, wind energy systems contribute to environmental improvement. So today we have a nice, indeed, mixture of experts on wind turbine technology. Starting from my left, Fabio Fugazzotto, who works at head of wind energy innovation at Green Power, ENEL. Lena Ketzing from DTU University, head of section on society, markets and policy. Then Hanif Mashal, CTO at LM Wind Power. And Jacob Edmonds, head of innovation at Ørsted. Well, thank you very much for joining me in this discussion. And well, I'm very curious to hear about your opinion and sharing with us your experiences about the key challenges and concerns on sustainability of wind turbines. And maybe starting with you, Hanif, you know probably quite a lot about production of wind turbine blades. Can you tell us what do we have to know, the first key challenge in increasing the circularability of wind turbine blades? What is the key issue?
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. As Helena mentioned, we make blades. Just to be clear, if nobody gets lost in translation, it doesn't mean knife, it's just blade. We had a situation in another country where the translator translated blade as knife. We have been in the wind sector for the past 40 years, and as LM Wind Power, we were part of the founding companies for wind in Denmark and so also in Europe. And our contribution is designing and manufacturing blades for wind turbines. And these blades, we designed less than 10-meter blades 40 years ago, and now we have designed blades that are more than 100 meter in length and over 50 tons each in production. So coming to the challenges when it comes to the circularity, there's a lot of material goes into these blades. And how do we recycle them and how to reuse is a big challenge. If we take the current blades or even the legacy blade, can they be recycled? Yes. But at what cost and what technologies and what CO2 emissions those technologies will bring? So basically, the key challenge is the technologies are not mature yet to give a good business case, low carbon emission to recycle these blades. So that's one. The second is a lot of the legacy wind turbines and the blades, they are scattered around. If we take Europe, they are in different countries, different areas. And we do not have in Europe yet a centralized system to recycle these blades, or in one country or one region. And if you try to build up the recycling facility in every country, that will make the business case even look worse. So key for us right now, from a technology point of view, mature up these technologies to recycle the blades, build up a policy that allows or incentivizes recyclability of the blades, be it the companies who are going to recycle it or being the manufacturers who will make blades that are recyclable. And as LM, we are part of some major programs. There's one program called DCOM. We are partnering together with some big OEMs, Siemens Gamesa, Vestas, or others. And it's going to address the legacy blades. But also we are working on innovation of the future designs to use recycled materials. And a project we have is called Zebra. It's a zero waste blade. So we are taking initiatives to address these challenges, but we cannot do it all by ourselves. So we need a collective partnership in this sector.
That's very interesting. Well, thank you for telling us a bit more about that. And you say collaboration is very important. Well, perhaps Fabio, can you tell a bit more about what utility like your company can actually mean or bring into this kind of collaboration? And well, what will you need from the part of legislation to make it really happen?
Well, thank you for the question. I believe all of us, we are moving toward this landfill ban promoted by 2025. And there are still some gaps to be fulfilled. From a legislation point of view, for example, there is today the lack, I believe, of a one unique, understandable regulation in how to manage these blades when reaching their end of life, both at European but also at national level. There are some divergent, let's say, regulation at country level, but they are not completely aligned within the same European Union. Then we found so far so many waste codes, for example. If you think of the waste code that could be attributed to the classification of wind blades, we found many of them. So we are trying to to work with our ministry, for example, of the environment and so on, in order to promote a restricted group of them, in order also to allow to the operators, thinking of logistic or treatment operators that should take should manage these blades when reaching their end of life and treated them, to have the proper authorization, because so far we also have this kind of issue. So it is not only a technological issue, as my colleague here was saying, but we have still other gaps to be fulfilled, like, for example, the lack of big and shared projects toward the industrialization and the scale-up of the most advanced recycling processes, for example, but also considering the production line that should be adopted by the reprocessors, so the people who at the end of the value chain should take into account the secondary raw material, let's say, and put into their production processes. And then at the end, we have not demonstrated yet that using this secondary raw material, it could be convenient, more convenient than using virgin materials, also from the perspective of the reprocessors. So we should maybe promote a more standardization and acceptability standards for this material to be used by reprocessors, also thinking of incentives, thinking that of course, we are not at the top level of maturity for recycling processes today, and we need to have some push in this industrialization and scale up of it.
All right, so there are definitely clear challenges. Jacob, perhaps moving beyond only the recyclability, we all are concerned about the environmental impacts of wind energy. A lot is already happening offshore, and much more is to happen still in the future. From your experience, what are the immediate impacts that can sector make to improve the environmental sustainability of the sector offshore?
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me today on the panel. I think it's interesting because when we from Ørsted started pioneering the offshore wind industry some 25 years ago or so, and we started building the first offshore wind farms in the world. We had one sort of objective, and it was build, construct. Can it actually be done? Can you put wind turbines up in those harsh environments? Then, as we found out that we could scale up this business and become more sort of, it became the real thing, you could say. It was all about sort of building to operate. And where we are today is basically thinking, going back and getting that sort of line of thought and saying, maybe it's not built to construct and built to operate anymore, but it's built to basically reuse. And I think that's the most important bit. If I take sort of an example, I mean, some of you online or in this room today live in households that are almost strictly sort of CO2 emission free. Most of them have been built in recent years. Some of them has been transformed over years, so it's old households that we're sort of transforming in all of this. And I think if you hold those two investments up against each other, you know what's most expensive, and that is to take an old building, an old house, and basically try to make it sort of CO2-free emissioned in that sense. Because obviously what we do from a construction perspective is something that radically changes the reuse opportunity that comes at the end of life. So I think the whole sort of build to reuse is something that we really need to pay a lot of attention to. And I think that's where one of the sort of opportunities lie within what we're doing here. The other thing I will mention just real quick, this morning, I don't know how it is with you guys, but I don't necessarily sleep well in hotels and these sorts of things. So I woke up very early this morning and I took a walk around the beautiful city of Brussels. And I went to Grand Place, as you're supposed to do, and I looked at the sort of, the town hall, and I'm thinking, what is the lifetime sort of, period for the town hall in Brussels, right? It was built in 1450 or something like that, so it's already 600 years old. And if you think about what we do, we have a very limited time span on what we construct. We normally build for a 25 to 30 year life cycle. So the potential of just expanding that percentage-wise, by 3, 4, 5 years would do dramatic changes to sort of, the climate and the sustainability purpose that we're at. So I think the two things that we should be sort of focusing quite is that build to reuse, and then also secondly, lifetime extend if possible. So build for a longer period of life, similar to the town hall I saw this morning.
Right, that's a very beautiful comparison, I think. And indeed, thank you for inspiring us to think differently about design. I think we need this more radical way of thinking to really make a change. But Lena, I think now we heard from the sector what are their challenges and ideas about really making impact. But what do we know from the societal and environmental perspective on where the contribution is really needed? What are the key concerns and challenges that we are nowadays researching, and is it enough really research on these topics? What would you say from your experience?
Oh, yeah, thank you very much, Helena. I think from a research perspective, I would like maybe to take one step back and look into the sustainability of wind energy as a whole. And we know that wind energy is one of the most powerful solutions that we have for decarbonization of our energy system. And that is because when we compare wind energy to other technologies, other decarbonization technologies, it is by far the most sustainable solution that we have. If we look into lifetime emissions, LCA analysis, life cycle analysis, it has the lowest life cycle emissions of all technologies. So it has by right been called best in class in the EU taxonomy. So I think we should never forget that. And I think that's also something, it's not only about life cycle emissions, it's also in other sustainability indicators that we're looking at. Land use, you would not think that, but in overall total life cycle land use, wind energy is one of the technologies that uses the least space globally per produced unit of electricity. So I think we should never forget that we are working with a technology that is the most powerful solution in terms of decarbonization and also in terms of sustainability if we want to transform our energy system in that direction. However, when we look into research, there is some research that is coming up looking a little bit different into sustainability. And I also hear, and I'm very glad that the industry is talking in the same direction, and that is that being best in class is not enough anymore. Because now we are looking into a factor that we are calling absolute sustainability. Is it enough that we are the best, that we are transforming our energy system in a direction that is more sustainable than before? And we can see that from climate research. We can see that from resource usage for the planet. It's not enough. We are still working towards a system that is absolutely not sustainable. We are using too much resources. We're using too much of our land and our nature. So when we're looking into that, we still need a lot of work to do, right? And that is exactly where we're coming into circularity, and where the wind industry also needs to do a lot. And of course, you from the industry, you know much more than I do about recycling and how far we've come. And we've heard early in the morning as well regarding, we need to do more on bringing down the resource usage, using raw materials that we have enough of, that we can afford to use. Recycling, reusing of the materials, repurposing inside the industry and maybe also to other industries. I think that's the ones that are important and where we need to do a lot. But I also just wanted to finish off saying that I'm very happy, very glad to see how willing the industry is actually, around these issues, right? So there is not a lot of, technology sectors around where, these issues have been taken up to the same amount, and there is a willingness, a push from Wind Europe towards, these recycling ban of landfill, things like that, and I think that's exactly the right way forward. So embracing the challenge, is a way, I think, from my perspective, to future-proof the industry, to be sustainable in the very long term.
Thank you. That's a very positive, I think, outlook for the future. So, Hanif, maybe back to you and the role of manufacturers. Well, we know already now, as Lena said, the devil can be in the details. So it's not only about recycling maybe the existing wind turbines and blades, but also looking into the manufacturing sites. Can you tell us a little bit more about in your factories, and what are the challenges, for example, about waste in manufacturing? Do we know enough about it, and what should we worry about?
Yes, so we have around 14 factories around the world, and when it comes to the manufacturing of these blades, just based on the consumption of the material each blade has, there is a significant amount of manufacturing waste. So of course we care about it. And while actually there are some research paper out there that says that in 10 years, the amount of waste from decommissioned blades are smaller than the amount of waste produced from manufacturing blades. So on average, actually, somewhere around 20 to 25% of the material that has to go into a blade doesn't make it to a blade. It just becomes a waste. So number one, it's hundreds of millions of dollars per year. It basically goes to the trash bin. Number two, if it goes to the trash bin, does it go to the landfill? Do we recycle it? Do we reuse it? So for us, as LM Wind Power, we put for ourselves goals. First of all, we can't do this while being in a renewable sector. We can't just take a bite out of our planet and then just chew half of it and then spit out 20% of it. So that's not sustainable. So what we do is we have significantly reduced our manufacturing waste. Actually, we recycle twice in 2021 as we did in the past. We recover the materials, be it whether it's from the consumables or be it from the actual material. But there is a long way to go. And that's where our Zero Waste Blade 2030 comes. So as LM, we have put a commitment for ourselves that by 2030 we will have a zero waste blade. And what does that mean? It means no material that we buy is going to go to waste in landfill. It will be recovered, or we are having materials which are already recycled. On that journey, a few years back, as LM, we decided to move away from most of balsa use in blades. Balsa wood is used in the core, and it's actually around 15% of the weight of the blade. And as LM, we were one of the biggest consumer of balsa wood in the sector because we make a lot of blade. We shifted to the recycled plastics. So actually, today at LM, over 90% of our core material consumption comes from recycled plastic bottles. We had to take that challenge on ourselves, as Fabio mentioned, that there are some of these recycled materials do not have the same strength as the virgin materials, and that's where the R&D comes. That's what makes companies like us be relevant, because we can figure out how to use a weaker material, which is recycled, to design longer, more efficient blades. So manufacturing waste is very key for us, and that's part of our zero waste. We are also looking into our suppliers. Overall, wind turbine when it comes to the CO2 emission, 75% of CO2 emission is actually from extraction of the material. And it could be composite material or steel or whatnot. So we are putting also a framework together with our main suppliers, be it glass, carbon, resin system, that they need to show us that they can reduce their CO2 emission, whether in manufacturing or the waste coming from their manufacturing. So we are collectively taking, it's not something that we as LM say, LM blade is zero waste by 2030. We can only make a zero waste blade if our supply chain is also having the same. And that's our commitment. And I think we have an obligation not only from a climate point of view to deliver on that, but also from a business point of view. It will save us commodity use if we reuse them. Also security of those commodities. If we can recycle blades or use recycled materials in Europe, we don't have to import it from somewhere else. So those are the steps we are taking, and I think it can be done. So.
Great. Well, clear opportunities, and very interesting to hear what all you already doing. But perhaps, Fabio, you can tell me something more about the opportunities that you think are for further collaboration with companies like yours and communities along the value chain. Because I think that's something that's we've so far didn't hear much about, right? We often talk about public engagement or residents' engagement around wind farms and assuring that they accept, so to say, the wind farm projects. But the massive expansion of wind energy that we are talking today about will mean that, well, wind energy is visible in very different ways, right? We will be seeing factories, we will be seeing more transportation and all the impacts of that. What kind of, well, possibilities do you think are for collaboration with communities along this whole value chain?
Yes. Well, this is a quite, let's say, wide question, no? Because you can think of acceptability of a wind farm both from, let's say, a social and environmental point of view, but then you also have to think the whole value chain behind a wind farm and the whole impact that this wind farm or the single turbine will have in terms of environmental impact, for example. So the whole value chain, starting from the manufacturing processes. Of course, we all well known the, let's say, the points of attention before to move with the deploying of a wind farm, for example, the noise pollution or the shadow flickering or all these things that could disturb, let's say, the local communities. But also we should take into account the biodiversity, for example, from an environmental point of view. So, for example, we are managing different cameras, radar, and so on in different countries like Italy, Spain, South Africa, in order to protect the biodiversity of the area, because it could be a tremendous impact on the wind farm that could bring to the local communities and the local, environment. So there are all points of the same aspect about the acceptability. But also, I believe that we are still, as a sector, managing with some false might. We are still hearing about the landscape impact or the soil occupation. Sometimes many projects are blocked by something like this. So I believe the whole sector should increase its capability of communicate and engage the local communities and the local environment, let's say, into the project since the beginning in order to let them accept it better and communicating better what are the advantages of renewables in general, but of course of wind energy, as my colleague saying before, which is one of the lowest LCA, in generation of energy. So we got many things to do, but we can do it only if we bring them on board, the communities, since the beginning, let them better understand the advantages of our projects. Then we should also consider, for example, we are paying a lot of attention about the scope 3 emissions. So we can not only think about the greenhouse gases emission produced by a certain power plant in operation, but we need also to start considering very well the whole impact of the greenhouse gases emissions, for example, starting from the manufacturing processes of certain components. We are asking to our suppliers actually to becoming greener and greener, reducing their impact, the environmental impact all along the value chain. So there are several aspects that we could work on, we are already working on, but we can improve and we should improve for the future, also considering the tremendous phase in which industry sector is today. From one side, the demand of an exponential growth, to the other side, the introduction of sustainable solutions into the value chain. So it is quite difficult, but we could make it if we can have a systemic approach altogether going in the same direction.
Yeah, thank you. That's really interesting, I think, a look into the challenges and opportunities for engaging and improving indeed with communities. And I think, Lena, you could tell probably us a little bit more about this, well, difficulty in finding a good balance between the large-scale ambitions around the climate and on the lower, really kind of trying to find appropriate solutions for engaging communities. And well, also we know that you are at the scientific advisory board on climate change. And I think you could tell us maybe a bit more about the difficulty in balancing what we know around climate science and what we know it's needed, and that's indeed translating that into concrete action at a local level.
Yeah, thank you very much. I would like to first react on something that Fabio said, and I'm very happy about what you said, because if you maybe noticed, he was not using the word acceptance, but acceptability. And I think that's quite an interesting difference, and something that we also like to hear is in a kind of a change in mindset, you can say. Because we've seen from a very large perspective in terms of the energy transition, we are entering a phase now where the change in the energy landscape and infrastructure will be much closer to the citizens, and it will be much more important. They are involved. And they are also making the right decisions and being active in terms of the energy transition. And in that sense, we cannot rely on pure technical solutions anymore. Previously, we were in a phase where technical solutions were sufficient to drive the energy transition. In the next phase we are entering into now, it's not enough anymore. We need to have social innovations, as we have heard before, process innovations, and we need to have the citizens on board. And in that sense, I think it's very interesting, this change of mindset that we are saying. We are not creating a technical solution that once it's done, it needs to get acceptance from the people when it's implemented. But we are creating an acceptable solution. And that is a different way of designing or innovating the technology, so that we are having the implementation in mind already when we are designing. And in that sense, social sciences research can actually help a great deal in understanding the acceptability of solutions, and it can bring new perspectives into the design of the technology itself. I can give you a couple of examples, maybe one example from some of the incredible research that's been coming out of my research group at DTU, where we are actually looking into social sciences in relation to wind energy. And it's also a change of mindset, you can say, that our group actually exists. Yeah? It was only created a couple of years ago that we are doing social sciences research at a technical or mostly engineering-dominated department. And one of the things that we have found is, we showed it for obstruction lights in 3 different countries, a large study that people get annoyed by these obstruction lights, mostly when they have not been involved in the process, when the projects were generated or constructed. right? So the actual visual impact of the obstruction light is less important than the empowerment or disempowerment they felt during the construction process. So that's when people get annoyed. And we see a similar effect going on with the sound that the turbines make. People get annoyed, they become noise, annoying noise, the sound that the turbines make, not by the decibel level, but the way they have been treated during the construction, during the development process. And these are things that we can understand, we are starting to understand, and we can bring into the research, because, or also into the implementation of projects, because we have a lot of focus on bringing down decibel levels. And I'm not saying it's not relevant, it's very relevant that we are doing that. But on top of that, we should also, you know, put resources in on improving the processes and trying to see how we can get people involved early in the process of implementing the projects, so that they not get annoyed by, you know, so they don't get reminded or they don't represent negative experiences that they had during the construction. Because we want to, and we know that, we want to build more and more and more of these projects, right? So we would have to get the acceptance over and over and over again, and more of it. And I think that's something that we should bring into the research projects, and then also the implementation projects more. And I'm quite happy that this is there is some trends into that direction. We see that in the Horizon Europe program. There's more emphasis on social sciences research, also in engineering projects, and that's something that we are very much welcoming. And on top of that, I think we should also maybe think about more dedicated social sciences researchers in projects in wind energy as a whole, so that we can feed that into the technical innovation. Yeah.
Thank you. That's very interesting, and I already see Jacob nodding. So I think there is a reaction from the side of.
Yeah, maybe just to follow up on this, and I fully agree. But I think there's one thing that we haven't spoken about when we talk about the societal impacts today, and that's the sort of geopolitical climate that we're in today. I think the successes of ETIP and also Wind Europe and others, and especially the research institutions, have been to map out the opportunity place. So where could we place wind farms? Where could we place these green electrons around Europe? But with the climate that we're in right now, I think we need to revisit something here, because we are seeing that national member states of the European Union are, of course, with all right means, worried about what does this mean to, for instance, the military defense zones. And I think that's one area that definitely needs attention also from a research perspective, is saying, are there sort of no-go zones in our sort of map of where we could place these renewable sources in the future, simply for the fact of, you know, you could say the fears of where's the next conflict, so weaponized conflict, going to be in Europe in that sense. So I think society is beyond sort of the not in my backyard element, which we definitely need to examine a lot more. We've seen measures before that transcends the technology, as you also said. In that sense, commercial measures, it could be dissemination measures and these sorts of things. But I think the Ministry of Defense angle is something that needs to be, you know, basically just raised in when we look at research topics for the future and the societal impacts on that.
Well, that's very indeed interesting. Is it maybe time to look maybe at the questions? I think the one about urban wind energy was quite interesting from the perspective of providing an alternative, I think, perspective, or maybe opportunity for, well, doing something, for example, about visual pollution impact. That's something that's definitely, I think, often mentioned as a key leading concern. But do you think that will make indeed this big change then, if we move towards, well, not only the classical wind turbines as we know them nowadays, but also to all the different types of designs, and how much space do we have actually for doing that? And then what do you envision to be the impact? Is it really, well, maybe from the social science perspective, that the problem of acceptance will be solved, or is it maybe too optimistic to think that.
Well, I don't have a lot of experience with airborne wind, I have to admit. But I want to refer back to an event that we had in September in Amsterdam with our ERA JP Wind. And there we had a talk from a landscape architect. And he has, in some way, turned the development process on its head and started with local community engagement and tried to, that was in the Netherlands, try to really develop together with them how wind projects could look like. And two of the projects that he mentioned, so there was in a marsh, I think, area where people really were opposed against rotating wind turbines, and they find a solution with these towers that are non-moving, for example. I don't even know how. They were very, very small megawatts, right? So I think it's not something that you can really do at scale. However, it was in an area where otherwise nothing would have been developed. Right, so and sometimes you can actually increase also in small incremental steps. And then another project that he showed was in a harbor area where actually the population would like to have these airborne wind because it reminded them of sailing, and so there was some design aspects related to that. And I think in these kind of more niche applications, I can totally see some application. But if we're talking about 1,000 gigawatts by 2050, I think we will still need to see the technology developing in that area if we really want to bring that in large scale.
But then from the industrial perspective, is there no space, would you say, for engaging with this, maybe concerns or ideas about alternative designs? Or like what's the space is in practice, actually?
Basically, the space is the more the merrier. When you look at the build-out targets that are constantly, it's almost like a race to the top, right? So every single day we open up a newspaper and we say there's a need for more, there's a need for more. So I would say also as a deputy chair of the ETIPWind Association in that sense, I think when we look at airborne solutions, it is a solution and it is something that's real, it's out there. It's still very, very early days, we must admit. But it is basically the tale of many routes, leads to the end state of what it is that we're trying to do. And there's space for everybody in this. I mean, the renewable sort of transition is basically just indicating that there is a market potential huge enough for all of these technologies to be in there. So personally, I think, the more the merrier, and it will actually solve a couple of, you could say, the societal impact elements into this. So of course, that would be something to investigate.
Right. And perhaps asking you, Hanif, producing wind turbine blades, is there a space for engaging citizens and people, youth, with just brainstorming ideas about how to improve wind energy? Or do we have the technology part already figured out and we just need to make sure that everyone...
I think there is always room to improve, and there is always room to learn. One very simple example, we were engaged in one of our markets and the customer said, I would like to have all your blades be painted green. So we painted the full blade coming out of the factory green. And actually it looked pretty good when they installed it. It did not just, cause any, it was like a lot of forest around it. So yes, having society, and I like what you said, Lena, about bringing those social aspect or people into the conversation. And if they are there, I think we are sometimes too mechanical about these topics. By that I mean, we wait for a written requirement. And then once the requirement is written, then we go and design it or implement it. I think in some cases when it comes to this social aspect, it requires debate. And it may not be one size fit all. So partly some places would like airborne wind turbines, so fine. But some other places where they need massive energy, that's where you need offshore. You need these massive offshore projects to deliver that amount of energy. So I think there's room, and I really like what you said about bringing people into the conversation, and then we can design. I think technology is there to solve it. So
That is great to hear that there is a space for creativity and still for innovating in a very creative, design-wise way. I think someone in our audience was inspired or interested, intrigued by the Zebra zero waste blade, asking when can we expect actually that this will be reality, that there will be the mainstream in the sector?
yeah. Well, we have already made a couple of prototypes, and we have put one of them in Denmark in our technology center. Has gone through some extreme load tests, so the blade is all in one piece, so things are working. I think in the next couple of years, what we will focus on is to really two things. One, industrialize it while using our already incurred cost of capex in our factories. So a lot of these technologies and innovation, we as an industrial company, when we innovate, we also look into how can I use the equipment that I already have in my factories with the new technology. So that's one area. And second is really working with our suppliers, because the type of the resin we are looking into, it's made by one supplier, not a small one, a pretty well established European one. So how do we make sure the cost of that material gets down? Because anything when it comes to recyclability or recycled material, it's always expensive. I would say on average somewhere around 10 to 15%, sometimes 20% more expensive, and then 20% weak. So that's our dilemma when it comes to the design and technology, how to make something out of 20% weaker material, but also make profitable business out of it when it's 20% expensive. So if you ask me when it would be in serial production, I would say in the next, 2-3 years, we'll start putting it in production. But it's coming down also for us to be incentivized having a recycled blade. I mean, this is one of my requests to European Commission. Is there an incentive to make a recyclable blade or a recycled blade? Because it is going to be expensive, at least in the beginning. I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, and I think really well connects to also what the audience is thinking about it, at least online, in terms of indeed talking about money and the costs of making this change, as well as perhaps really defining sustainability. Maybe Fabio could give us the last idea on how, someone asking how to measure actually sustainability and what kind of what kind of criteria should we be using in thinking about sustainability of wind turbine blades, at least maybe from your company's perspective?
About blades, sustainability of blades, you mean, or in general?
Well, I think the question was a little bit broader, but I can imagine that well, zooming into different issues, you could probably define it in different ways. So perhaps your vision on how to operationalize sustainability.
Well, I'm thinking we are talking about recycling since the start of the panel. So I thinking of recycling or reusing our wind turbines. We know the majority of materials are quite recyclable. The rotor blades are the most difficult one today and represent the real issue. So thinking of sustainability in terms of circularity of our wind farms should focus right now, from now on, for the very next few years, about solving the issues we were mentioning before about recycling of wind blades, the older ones. But of course, we need also to put on top of that the introduction of new materials, even more sustainable since the beginning. So circularity by design, let's say, starting from scratch, pushing the suppliers, introducing newer materials, more sustainable, more recyclable since the beginning, and allowing them to test this solution, to introduce them into the supply chain, and let us, like a final user, test this technology as soon as possible. This in parallel, of course, of the scaling up of the recycling processes for the existing ones, the existing blades. These are the two major challenges I see right now.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for inspiring us, I think, to think differently about design, about sustainability and wind energy, and also for, well, sharing your experiences and concerns for the future. Please join me in thanking now the panel for the discussion, and hopefully we can continue later.
Thank you indeed to all of you. And then I will make the transition to the last conversation that we want to have here on stage. If you didn't notice, the thread of the entire day is that we were moving from very immediate short-term needs, the competitiveness, the health of the supply chain, towards more medium, perhaps for some will be long priorities with coexistence, recyclability, and now also medium to long, the system integration elements of wind. So there is a thread that we are following in the program and how we want to drive forward the priorities. It is my pleasure now to introduce the next panel that is going to talk about exactly energy system integration. And today we have 15% of wind energy in the demand of everyone in Europe. How can we get to more than 3 times of that? So Annie Scalan is going to moderate from Wind Europe. So please come in here. And then I will also invite our fellow panelists to join me on stage. Thank you.
Perfect. So good afternoon, everybody. We've reached our final panel of the day, so thanks so much for staying with us. As Ivan said, yeah, we're looking now at another piece of the puzzle, which is energy system integration, which is key when we look to answering the question of how do we get from the 50% wind that we have currently on our grids today to 50% wind in power demand by 2050. So we're going to look today at the EU strategies and policies that we can work on to quickly build out this grid to get ready for the massive amounts of renewables that are coming in the future. Some of the tools that we'll need, particularly on the innovation and technology side. So lots of big questions, and hopefully our panel can give us all the answers. Reminding you also to look at the Slido, and if anyone, of course, wants to speak up in the audience here today, please do. I'll introduce our panel first. So we have Lukasz Kolinski, who is Head of Units Green Transition and Energy System Integration at DG ENER, European Commission. We have Suzanne Nies, who is General Manager Germany at Smart Wires. And then from ENTSO-E, which is the TSO Association, we have Norella Constantinesco, who's Head of Innovation. And right next to me, we have Eric van Iperen, who is General Manager of Renewable Power Generation at, Renewable Power Generation Technology. That's a long title. At Shell. And as we said, my name is Annie Scanlon. Now we all know who we are. I think let's go straight into the questions. Norella, please, can we start with you? Clearly a big challenge, 50% wind on the grid in just 3 decades. What needs to happen in terms of perhaps permitting, grid access, reinforcement? How can we really make sure we fast track the connection of these wind assets?
So of course this is a large capacity which has to be integrated, both onshore and offshore. For transmission system operators, of course, we have to look mainly offshore because, as we heard in the previous panel, there is the huge capacity. Permitting, it's an issue for the wind farms, but also for our networks, to be honest. So we have to take into account different dimensions related to the environment, related to the transport, shipping, related to the ecosystem of environment, nature, and so on. So this is a big challenge, and the planning from this perspective, it's important. Of course, we have, in a way, to evolve also the architecture of the grid, which is going to be there in order to integrate this huge capacity, especially offshore. So we had point-to-point connection. We have now radial connections which are in place. We have to build something which is a little bit more oriented to the islands, to the meshed offshore grid. And of course, in order to achieve this, we have to take into account different dimensions. First of all, there is a market dimension which have to be put in place for the offshore integration. Then there is the technical dimension, as we call it. So we have to develop and to solve the interoperability challenges in terms of HVDC technology. As well, in a way, the supply chain operational dimension, because all these capacities which are going to be offshore connected to HVDC then have to be brought onshore as well. So here we have onshore the AC grid. So this AC-DC interface and then hybrid developments have to be taken into account with the stability provision for the AC network. Of course, we have the regulatory and the governance dimension. So the orchestration between the pan-European and the national cross-border financing. And in order to arrive there, we have to do the plans quite quickly in order to put this in place. So in terms of grid access and reinforcement, I would say that we need to reinforce the grid onshore. And of course, in order to be able to bring this generation capacity from offshore, and we need to develop and to put the first steps in the multi-terminal, multi-vendor solutions.
So lots of pieces of the puzzle. That's a good overview, thank you. And key to that, of course, is investment. So we look to the European Commission. Lukasz, perhaps you can speak a bit about what are the plans to accelerate the investments that we'll need?
Yes, thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone. Obviously, the question of the grids is going up the agenda in the Commission. Why? We always thought that we need to increase the targets towards 2030 and then 2050, and now with what's going on in Ukraine, we see we need to front-load these investments. And therefore, but there is no front-loading of generation on a massive scale without having the grid, which is, as was said, which is already which is adapted. And we see that this problem is, and we do recognize it as the Commission, this is an issue for the massive deployment of renewables. The grid connections, the waiting time, the need for reinforcement, etc. I would mention a few elements that could help from our perspective to move ahead with investments. The first one is the 10E regulation, the regulation on trans-European networks for energy, which is in force since June. And this revamped our approach to the projects of common interest that changed, for example, the corridors and categories for these projects in order to better adjust to what is coming. So in a sense, to support electrification, to support smartening of the grids, but also let's keep in mind in terms of system integration to support hydrogen production. This is a new element which, as you know, we are pushing quite hard as the Commission. There are many, obviously, there is also a dedicated approach in the 10E regulation to offshore. We do recognize these investments are specific. They take a lot of time to prepare. They require grid connections, so there is a dedicated approach there. And then obviously, I mean, there are many benefits from having projects as PCIs, as projects of common interest. There is access to financing, there is visibility, but one of them is accelerated permitting, and that's the other point of the agenda that we are pushing quite hard on. We realize that all this ambition that we have as the EU will not be realized if the project's preparation, including the grid permitting, takes so long as today. So there I would briefly mention a few elements. The current Renewable Energy Directive that is already in place for a few years and was supposed to be transposed and implemented already more than a year ago. We have infringement procedures against all the member states because that Renewable Energy Directive was supposed to include or included deadlines for grid connection permits. And we still see that the member states are struggling to implement it, although a few years have passed. The second element is the revision of this Renewable Energy Directive that tries to accelerate permitting not only for generation but also for grid connection, including the introduction of the overriding public interest for renewables. And it's important because that's also for the grid connection and the relevant grid. And finally, okay, the question, but can something be done now? Yes, we do that. Some member states are pushing ahead with increased transparency of grid capacity availabilities, which help to locate investment. They are pushing with digitalization of grid, smartening of grid. We prepare the guidance for all member states to kind of learn from each other because already under the existing legislative framework, this is possible. Briefly, another important element, the climate and energy state aid framework, which was the new one, which is in place since February, that allows innovative approaches to financing of the grid. We have a platform with the national competent authorities on the investments in grid capacities, and we're discussing how this can be financed in a better manner. We have the Energy Infrastructure Forum in which we are discussing this with the member states authorities, and the final element, financing. I would say there is no lack of financing for the grid reinforcement at the European level. But we do see that the project developers, the national authorities, they struggle with preparing these projects, maturing these projects so that they can be, with the European financing, they can be implemented quickly. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and particularly for picking up on that point on permitting, also meaning the grid access, because yeah, clearly that's a big bottleneck in this industry. Eric, just turning to you. Clearly we've got a good spread of the people that are going to actually be actioning all of these big ambitions. Are you hopeful that industry, TSOs, authorities are going to be able to work in this very seamless way to really deliver the wind that we need on the grids?
Oh, thanks for the question, and thanks for having me here. So I would say I'm cautiously optimistic, and I will share sort of 3 reasons why. The first one sort of builds on what was just mentioned around getting one of the problems for integration is getting all this power onto the grid in the first place. So Wind Europe has analyzed that investments in the grid need to double to more than 80 million a year. And what's very promising is that indeed the European Union is now having the Repower EU package that actually addresses some of the blockers against that accelerated deployment and proposes concrete steps to tackle that, like the overriding common interest that was just mentioned, but also the go-to areas for renewables and grid where permitting can be accelerated. And I think another reason why I'm optimistic is that a second blocker is the mismatch between excess generation and then the demand for that supply and the need for flexibility of that demand. And there again, I think the Power EU package proposes concrete steps to tackle that. For example, mandates for renewable energy targets in transport and industry, which we very much support, because one of the best ways to integrate all of that energy is to have these demand centers that can be flexible and then accommodate the generation capacity when it is being produced, for example, through electric vehicle charging or heat pumps. So third reason to be optimistic is about some of the technologies that we need to integrate all this wind into this energy system are actually available today, and there are already creative ways by policymakers to enable the deployment of those technologies. So as part of the Crosswind consortium, Shell is developing a subsidy-free super hybrid offshore wind farm project in the Netherlands, where we are combining wind with floating solar, battery storage, and hydrogen electrolysis, aiming to make a component of that production continuously available, independent of whether the wind is blowing at that point in time or not. So, okay, 3 reasons to be optimistic. There are still some concerns as well, and that is mainly about the longer timelines for integration of wind in the energy system, because, of course, wind can vary in days and weeks and months. In 2021, we saw a record year of low wind speeds in Europe. And for that, at the moment, gas and coal are picking up the slack. And for that, we really need urgently low carbon, long duration energy storage solutions to be developed to solve that seasonal integration challenge.
Great, thank you. And exciting to hear some of the solutions that Shell is going to put forward for us. At Wind Europe, we like to say the wind is always blowing somewhere. So I think the innovations, if we can better connect Europe through the grids, can make sure that we can address some of the solutions you picked out there. Talking of innovation, Suzanne, I think we should move to you. And clearly, with offshore wind, it's a big engineering challenge in essence. But onshore, and as we heard earlier, it's a logistical, some social barriers there. What innovations do we need then to build out the onshore grid and integrate wind and other renewables?
Thanks a lot for the question, and I'm super happy from the very
I'm going to take the microphone. Yeah, great.
From today's start, Adrian was mentioning we have opened the steering committee of ETIP in order to take stock of the social, but also even grid and other aspects. And I very much welcome this. Lukas has said the same. I think there's a risk now that we are, again, a little behind the discussion in that sense that, yes, we need to build more grids. Completely agree. But the existing grid can be largely optimized. And I was yesterday at ENSOE's Vision event, System of Systems. I would maybe talk about a cluster transition. It is very clear that we need to cluster the new blades, but we also need to put in everything that's available. And that's not even innovation. It's just on the shelf. And it gets old and it's not used. So it's absolutely important to use everything we have, knowing that grids in average come 12 years later. There's only one exception that comes from Lukas' home country, Rzeszów, Chmelnytska, that comes by January after 6 months. But it's a different story. But in principle, they come 12 years later. In the meantime, we can optimize existing grids. We had before this produce and forget statement long time ago about renewables. Today, we could say it's just a curtail. It's not even produce, just curtail. In my home country, Germany, we are having this year at least 5 billion euro congestions by the end of this year. Some talk about 8. Next year, we have at least 10 billion euro congestion that includes curtailment costs. And you can do something about those, and they include that you build massively. 510 gigawatts is the plan for Europe on wind, only 750 on wind and solar, but you will curtail a lot of this if you're not using innovative grid technologies. So my company, Smart Wires, we are one of those. We have the so-called power electronics, FACTS devices that can tremendously optimize existing grids, but there's many others. We have talked about storage, we have dynamic line rating, we have software solutions, we need a smart interface. And I also listened this morning to Rosalinde, and with all my respect, we need to remain the technology leader. I have some doubts about it. I think we are maybe a technology leader in wind, but I don't think we are a technology leader at all in many other areas. Yeah? So we need to become a technology leader. We need to move out of analog, which we are. In Germany, again, smart meters are a Fremdwort. Yeah? No one has ever seen those. Yeah? Only Italy. Yeah? Without smart meters in the winter, with 650,000 of these electric heaters bought in Germany, no one has a clue how they are impacting on the system. Yeah. So why don't we have smart meters? Why don't we say, Commission, we need those smart meters now, which is one part of this cluster innovation. I think this is absolutely important to get there. So regulation was mentioned as well. Of course, we need what was called innovation in governance. Yeah. I couldn't agree more. But I think everyone needs to innovate on his own level. Talking about open source means we need to have the likes of NSOE, but not only NSOE, to publish their data. There's no way, even in the fantastic transparency platform, to find any information on congestion costs in Europe today. Why don't you have this? Yeah? Why don't you put your model to the stakeholder community, to the wind community, that we can find those solutions together? So this is what I clearly want to emphasize here. We are now looking forward 20 of October to the winter outlook that ENSO is going to release 2 months earlier. And we have tremendous challenges in Europe between Spain and France. The border is completely congested. Ukraine was synchronized in days time, fantastic, yeah. But I think we need to have exactly that system perspective, taking every technology. I quote to come to an end, Hanif, who was saying, technology is there to solve it. Yes, please take it.
Clear message. Thank you so much. Narella, maybe we go back to you. Looking deeper at these technologies that are going to really optimize and make our grids more suited for all the renewables coming. HVDC, so high voltage direct current. They're developing fast, particularly to connect offshore wind. So what type of collaboration is needed to really accelerate the deployment of this technology? And can it be operated safely and in a coordinated manner?
Yes, I think we started actually this cooperation, and personally, I was involved in that cooperation with Wind Europe and also with T&D Europe, so the manufacturers. We were there for 2 years talking to each other to solve and to reach the agreement. So it was an interesting journey we put together. But now we are together in a common framework. We reach a common position, and we started to develop also common projects. And to be honest, so there is the European Commission which is supporting that cooperation which we put in place. So we are looking in the framework conditions. The work streams we need to arrive to this multi-terminal, multi-vendor solution, because we have existing projects today, but for the future we need this concept of plug and play. So in order to deploy fast. And we look into technical issues. We look into intellectual property rights. We have the governance which has to be there, and our aim is actually to find these places and then to use our products, the TUNDP, and then also afterwards the PCI, and then potentially Connecting Europe facility to deploy this multi-vendor, multi-terminal solution. So what is important, it's also when we push these research efforts to arrive to that stage where we have the de-risking. And the de-risking, of course, is taken by the first movers. So there are, for example, TSOs, but also together with the wind developers, which moved towards this concept. building the energy island. So of course there is the HVDC, but I agree with you. So there is also the hydrogen development, which is needed for ensuring the long-term storage solutions. So because there we don't have so many technologies. So of course there is hydropower pumped, but we also need hydrogen. So I would say that yes, we have a good base today, but we need to keep the pace and to push forward this momentum.
And to pick up on that spirit of collaboration and the point Suzanne made about more transparency in data sharing, is that something that ENTSO-E could do more of?
Yeah, I know Susanne's point, and I think yeah, of course we need to look into the future, and I agree with you, Suzanne. From innovation perspective, of course, we have to look towards the open source approaches for the codes, for the data exchange, and so on. But we probably, yeah, we have a little bit this limitation of the legacy systems and the models and the dynamicity which is going to be brought in, including by this type of technologies like HVDC. And there is quite some substantial work to be done, I think.
And a reaction from you, Suzanne? No. Okay, brilliant. Okay, thanks. Now, switching gear a little bit to return to more the policy side, regulatory sandboxes. This was a key part of Repower EU. So this is about member states having controlled environments to experiment with the policy and see if we can roll that out, essentially. So are these sandboxes suitable to test these innovative solutions to integrate more wind, for example, offshore hybrids to better link projects between countries?
Indeed, regulatory sandboxes are part of the Repower EU, which is now still being negotiated by the Parliament and by the Council. I hope that they will finish these negotiations by the end of the year. And the purpose was very clear. We wanted to push more the testing of the innovative solutions. There were already quite a few areas named for these type of solutions: storage, demand-side response, smartening of the grids, but also for generation. When you think about generation, there is a large area which I believe is pretty prone to testing. It's all the innovation that can help for the wind power, for the wind installations to coexist with nature. I mean, that was the topic of the previous panel. Rather than being reduced by the environmental constraints. So there are many areas where innovation can help. These sandboxes, let me be very clear, this is to test innovative solutions. So if you think about a first pilot project or a demonstration project, this is the idea behind it. At the same time, this is to allow the member states to test these solutions where they face undue regulatory barriers. And this is, by the way, these sandboxes at the national level, in some member states, they are happening in a very, very narrow context, and we want to give it more encouragement. But I would like to finish with a word of caution. These sandboxes, they cannot be used where they may distort the market, the internal energy market. So this is not a carve out from the European legislation that can be used for existing technologies, for the known technologies, because then, of course, we would no longer have a level playing field. And in this context, I would think, of course, they can be used for offshore, but not for all types of solutions that one might think about for offshore, where exactly this distortion could happen.
Interesting point. Eric, I saw you having some facial reactions there. You want to pick up on that point?
Well, not maybe specifically on the sandboxes piece, but I think that experimentation and jointly looking at solutions to solve some of the challenges, I think that's very much welcome and needed.
Absolutely. Okay, well then do you want to dive into more the enabling technologies? So we heard a bit of hydrogen, storage, clearly this is important. So how do the European officials, the policies support this, perhaps with more funding, in essence, to be able to integrate that better into the energy system?
Yeah, first I would say there's still much that can be done within the wind industry to further drive down cost, but increasingly looking at a system cost level. So perhaps looking at different optimization objectives and perhaps optimizing more for the lower wind speed conditions, but also improving weather forecasting and power production forecasting, so we can avoid imbalance costs and solve those to create less of a problem by the grid operators. And if I then look more sort of energy system wide, then a lot of the technologies that are needed for integration exist, like flexible demand response I mentioned, but also integrating batteries and solar with wind, and they're already cost competitive. We just need really the right policies to encourage them, and that includes things like support or mandate for electrification of heat and transport, but also very much seabed tenders that encourage system integration. And again, I'd like to sort of highlight the example of using non-price criteria that enabled that crosswind example to happen. Where we are really driving forward a lot of the technology innovation activities that are needed for system integration of wind in the future. And we very much hope that other countries, for example, Germany, will also adopt such non-price criteria when they look to award seabed for offshore wind. Then there are also some technologies that exist today, but really need scaling up. For example, green hydrogen, indeed. And there, it's very much about supporting the growth of the market. So Shell would support, for example, a carbon contracts for difference approach, but also industrial mandates that will bring that market to scale, and with it, bring down the cost of those technologies. Then still, there's a lot of promising frontier technology development and ideas in the long duration energy storage space. But those really require significant investment to develop those further. And there are around the world dedicated support programs. There's the 100 million program in the UK to do a demonstration of long duration energy storage projects. There's even the $1 billion program in the US where the target is to reduce the cost of long duration energy storage by 90% over a 10-year period. And Shell is very proud and happy to be on the Global Council for Long Duration Energy Storage to really debate exactly just that. How do we get these technologies and solutions into the market that can help integrate wind in the energy system?
So you think there's something we should be learning from non-EU countries? You picked up on a UK and a US example.
I think it's always good to look outside and learn from others and adopt what works.
Great, thank you so much. Sticking with the policies topic, Suzanne, what policies do we need to really revolutionize and accelerate system integration of the technologies we've been discussing here?
Thanks for this question. I would like to make 2 points here. I think the first point is what's always said is this energy efficiency first principle, and I think it's not really understood what it means. When you talk, even here, we had a dinner yesterday, energy efficiency is understood by most as the efficiency in houses. Okay, I need to consume less in my house. But we need to think about system efficiency, and there is some good tentatives to understand what it means. For example, the smart grid indicator or system efficiency and all these kind of things. Network efficiency as well is one of the requirements on the regulatory side, but it still is quite embryonic. And I think these days, with these very high congestions, with these huge subsidies given in order to firefight a dramatic situation and increasing levels of curtailment for the sake of system security, while 3% are accepted in the planning for efficiency purposes, it's absolutely urgent to come up with a sound definition of what does it mean energy efficiency first in a system. So system efficiency, And I think the case of, again, congestion, it's not the TSOs that are responsible for this, but they are the only ones that can address it. In Germany, the regulator has written now in the next incentive regulation that if TSOs, there's 4 in Germany, yeah, if they reduce the congestion cost, they get 30 million euro. And if they don't do it, they lose 30 million. But 30 million is peanuts for them. They will not take any action. Yeah? So that's the step is probably right, but the amount is absolutely ridiculous when you think in 100 billions that need to be invested only in this country. Yeah? So that means the second point I want to make is regulation. Yeah? We mentioned rightly these regulatory sandboxes. I think they are perfect for technology readiness level, maybe up to 7, 6 something. Yeah, but they're absolutely not the right tool when you talk about mature technologies that are on the shelf. Yeah, there you need something else, and we can look around us. For example, in the UK, Pathfinders. Yeah, that is operational. It's NGET, the national grid. The operator, they publish. I have this problem. Market, give me solutions. Whatever it is. Yeah, can be hardware, can be software, can be a mix of both. Whatever. Yeah, and this is what needs to happen as well. And we need to look around us. In my company, everything works but Europe. National Grid exempted or the UK exempted, which is not normal. Latin America, Australia, US, everything is going well. Not in Europe because we are way too slow. It's not only about NIMBY, it's about regulation that is regulation from the old times, looking at capex heavy, building more grids.
Thank you. So clearly this grid optimization is going to be a key part of this solution. Lukasz, do you think that's really the answer in areas we see, particularly in areas like Eastern Europe, which have very weak grids?
Indeed, I think it's clear that, and I fully subscribe to what Susan said, that before we think about grid expansion, we need to use better the existing grids. The solutions are there, indeed. And therefore, I think that clearly this grid optimization is part of the policy framework, let's say, that we have. I mean, I'm always wary of a situation where where we have a problem in the current system, we invent another system and we hope that it will work from tomorrow. I think that the current system with TYNDPs is a good framework to push for grid optimization. The demand side response, the storage solutions should be another part of this framework, of this exercise. So that's one. Second, yes, I think that there is quite some space for the national authorities to push for these types of solutions in the framework of TYNDPs. And to optimize indeed the current grid based on today's flows, but also the anticipated flows there. Now, for the Central and Eastern Europe, obviously the weak grid is an issue, but let's be also frank. I mean, we have the European instruments for all the member states, but we have also instruments that could help in the East, such as, for example, modernization fund. That's for exactly those member states with the problems with the grid. And I had a look recently at what has already been financed by the modernization fund. So we're talking about storage solutions in Hungary, where they have they have this issue related to pretty quick deployment and massive deployment of solar energy. So storage very needed. In Poland, you had the smartening of the grid projects, relatively large. In Romania, digitalization of the grid. So there are instruments, there is money to finance these countries where the problem is particularly pertinent.
Thank you. So, well, in Brussels, we love an acronym, don't we? TYNDP, which is the 10-year Network Development Plan. And then also we've got the PCIs, the Projects of Common Interest. Should we just double the amount of these projects that are happening? Yeah, you could pick up on that, please. Thanks.
No, I first, there is no limit to the number of projects in TYNDP, one. Second, the whole idea is for this list, for this 10-year list, to be manageable. I mean, this list needs to be implemented. It will not help if it stays on paper. So if we make the list longer and then we implement it, I'm all on board. if we double the number of projects on the list and then they don't progress well and we see that they are not implemented, then what's the point?
Quite. Okay. I think maybe let's turn to the audience. We've got Slido, but is there anyone that wants to speak up in the audience in our real life situation? Or is everyone's a bit shy? Okay, we'll stick to Slido. We've got a top question here. We must ensure the equipment is this about supply chains? Is that about grids? Maybe heat pumps. Heat pumps, that's a hot topic, isn't it? Connecting heat pumps, are they a priority or a nice to have?
I don't know if I can speak. Of course, Repower EU puts them high on the agenda. So this the number has to double by 2027 in comparison to what we have today. This goes a little bit hand in hand with the electrification process, which from certain perspective can be also looked as energy efficiency, because the electrification, for example, in the heat pumps probably will bring efficiency. In order to, so the heat pumps, I think they can become not only by themselves, but they can become also part of the flexibility solutions for actually the system. So if I can jump on this.
Yep.
Just very briefly, 2 words on the heat pumps. Clearly, they are a priority, not nice to have. And we see that in the current crisis, people are voting with their feet. The heat pump sales are going up across many member states. We see the early indication is doubling, tripling of the sales. As was said already, they can play a role in ensuring that the system is flexible and is secure, so they can, in particular when they are being deployed together with the PVs and potentially also with the domestic batteries. But this is exactly the point. We need to make sure that the rollout is helps the system, is kind of makes the system as flexible as it was or more flexible. But if this is done without plan, then they can be distortive as well. In my country, there is already a discussion where the sales of heat pumps are going up very much. Fortunately, mostly with the PVs. There is already discussion about something that we haven't seen before in Poland, I mean, which is the new winter peak of coal-based electricity, because people are switching from other fuels to the heat pumps and thus increasing demand for electricity.
Suzanne.
A very interesting point. I mean, it's a super question. I would say I also agree heat pumps form part of the solution. To mention one point here, is it individual heat pumps? Or, for example, Fraunhofer and others have been looking into big heat pumps, and they, for example, did a study on having Berlin climate neutral by 2035 if you use the differential of waters, let's say the big lakes there, and have this kind of block approach to many houses. So you need to think about supply chain and life cycle of those little or bigger things. And I couldn't agree more with you, Lukas, on the, say, electrification. Yeah, I mean, today it's maybe 20% of the energy mix is electricity. The future is 60%. The rest is probably hydrogen. Yeah, but if you now jump from 20% to 40% and everyone buys electric heaters, heat pumps, electric cars, and I don't know what, yeah, then Norilla and the system has a huge problem, and we see adverse effects like this coal thing. Yeah? So we need to have a more comprehensive, common approach without falling into a planified economy. That shouldn't be the aim, but it should be guided. And I do think that the NECP guidance that's now prepared by the European Commission, yeah, should really have such elements there. Think about the system efficiency, yeah, and overcome, okay, I want this technology, I want that technology. It's like a shopping list, yeah, but you need to have an overall approach to the system in order to make it broadly efficient.
Thank you. And Eric?
I guess heat pumps are triggering a lot of excitement on the panel. That's quite interesting to see. I would also sort of like to highlight then the industrial heat application area, where really it adds on the demand response side, but it also creates a route for further system integration through heat storage rather than electricity storage. So when we tackle the high temperature industrial heat demand also through electrification, and some of the storage technology could shift from actually heat storage, which could be a very cost-effective solution from electricity storage.
Great, thank you. Heat pumps always a hot topic. That's what we always say. Okay, the manufacturing question is getting quite popular, so let's go for that. So we must ensure equipment is made in Europe and not China or elsewhere. Otherwise, we risk a Russia crisis 2.0. How do we keep and grow production here? Anyone like to pick up on that? Suzanne, thank you.
Maybe just to start, I think it's a very important point. The IEA has done a nice report on the supply chain, and I think many things have been said today already on this point. Yeah, maybe we need to think about something like the common agricultural policy in the 60s. That was there to avoid that we become totally dependent on the supply of food products from third countries. Yeah? So in some sense, yes, we need to build these also for the sake of sustainability. We need to build those sites, and maybe with the decommissioning of coal, hopefully one day, yeah, and the industrial sites that need to be revamped. You need to think about how can you incentivize setting up spaces, places with smart skilled labor that was mentioned as well, in order to have European sites that are worth the name.
So a kind of common manufacturing policy, CMP we're going for?
CMP,
okay,
yes.
Heard it here first. Any more questions? So fixing grids or fixing permitting, they're both key to meeting targets. Which is the priority? I'm imagining a bit of both. Is anyone wanting to pick up on that question? Yeah, great.
Of course, there is the connection point, and we hope that we will be able to work together. So having this hybrid project, so deploying still, I refer because it's ETIPWind, so I still refer to the wind and probably less to the heat pumps. We have the hybrid projects, and we work together for actually developing this, especially this offshore grid, which cannot be continued in as it was deployed until now with all this point-to-point and radial. So this will, in a way, reduce probably the corridors. We also have the technology which is there, the superconductivity, which maybe we will be able to use it, also rather soon for this type of connections, and this probably will enable actually to have a less environmental impact. We have less losses and so on. So this will help probably also with the permitting.
Great, Suzanne, did you want to pick up?
Yeah, no, on the question, clearly both is very important, fixing grids and fixing permitting, in optimization, building more grids, and maybe it's even more largely on infrastructure. Yeah, so public transport, train networks, and everything else needs to be fixed. Yeah, on the permitting, I would love to see that we go beyond this this very boring NIMBY discussion. Yeah, which is like people just don't want it in their backyard. I think we need to take those guys serious that are defending the nature. There's huge challenges there, and I've seen in 3 times this. Renewables Grid Initiative, and I think they did a great job in getting both parties on the table. That needs to happen with wind as well. Just need to listen, what are the people saying, how can you find your solutions around this. So I think a better discussion with the stakeholders, better sharing of advantages as well. Yeah, so people that live in vicinities of wind grids, windmills need to have probably a better electricity price or whatever the solution could be. Yeah.
Great. Maybe just to go to one last question. So this is about direct electrification being an efficient use of renewables. Can we ensure it remains a top priority for policymakers and investments? I don't know, Eric or Lukasz, want to pick on that point? Do we think it's a big enough priority?
Well, I can't comment too much about whether it is a policy priority, but it's clear that direct electrification has huge benefits to indirect electrification. It's also important to recognize that not everything can be directly electrified, but those markets and applications that can require a lot of focus from a technology development side.
Indeed, I would only add that with the whole Renewable Energy Directive revision and the framework that we are now setting, the reinforced framework for 2030 with a higher target, the overall target, but then also targets per sectors, you will clearly see that we cannot deliver them if we don't have enough generation, and we cannot have enough generation if the grids are not there. And I believe this will be coming in the coming years as a top priority for the policymakers.
Great, thank you. And clearly that collaboration is already happening, and we're working all hard to deliver this grid revolution that we really need to be able to have so many more renewable assets on our grids. So exciting time, and thank you so much for talking to me today, and good that you're all clearly working together anyway, so it's brilliant work. And yeah, hope everyone enjoyed our discussion this afternoon, and thank you so much.
Well, it's getting really interesting and more dynamic here on the stage. Unfortunately, like all things, they need to go to an end, and we all have some limited time or time reserved for this. Before I will do some concluding remarks, I would like to have on stage Baris Adiloglu, who is with SINEA at European Commission, for some perspectives from the Climate, Infrastructure and Environment Agency, and then we will wrap up this session here today. Baris, stage is yours.
Thank you, everyone. Hello, everyone. First of all, thanks very much to ETIPWind for organizing such a nice event, and thanks to all of you for being here. Thanks to all the stakeholders of the wind industry for your participation. We have heard today so far about the contribution of European Commission to a green Europe through policy making, thanks to the participation of my colleagues from different DGs. And here I am standing in front of you representing SINEA, as Adrian said, the European Climate, Infrastructure and Environment Executive Agency. As an executive agency, what we do is complementary to what the colleagues in DGs are doing. They make policy and we implement it. So at SINEA, we are implementing parts of Europe EU funding programs on transport, energy, climate action, environment, maritime fisheries, and aquaculture. And then the programs that we are managing provide a total of 55 billion euros of funding to the research and innovation community. I'm also here today as the project officer of the ETIPWind project, which is a project funded by through the Horizon Europe program, and which aims to strengthen the activities of ETIPWind, but also the set plan implementation work group on offshore wind. So of course, the technology and innovation programs are very important tools in accelerating the deployment of green technologies as part of the set plan. And as such, ETIPWind has a very important role in making sure that the set plan initiative receives consensus-based feedback or advice from the stakeholders in prioritizing the research and innovation on wind in Europe. So we hope and believe that ETIPWind will enable the right communication channel for bringing the industry and research together for fostering such innovation in Europe. So dissemination and communication is very important. A wide communication is very important in this sense. So we need to make sure that we don't only communicate between each other, but we need to reach out to a wider audience, including the society. So today has been very interesting for me and very informative. Thanks a lot for all the panel members as well. And I hope that the audience share my opinion. So we have really listened to a lot of interesting discussions on the integration of wind at large scale, the societal and environmental impacts, and then the coexistence of wind and then the society together, the supply chain, and then I wish thank you already, as Rosalinda said at the beginning, to ETIPWind for all the good work to come in the coming years. Thanks once again to the participants, to those people who dedicate a lot of time to the work of ETIPWind. And at SINEA, we are going to continue doing our best for supporting the European Green Deal through the implementation of such nice projects. Thanks again. Have a good day, everyone.
Thank you very much, Boris, and we count on your support on implementing everything we have discussed here. Right, so thank you very much. Do I have slides? Guess this brings us to an end here at this kickoff event. Again, thank you for your participation, first of all. Also the people out online, back in your homes or offices. A pity you could not be here face to face with us, but appreciate your interactiveness through the online tools and Slido, your questions there. So thank you very much for all of that. I would like just to summarize here a few points that I heard today, that I learned actually today. And I classify those in two main topics, right? Number one is short term. Short term, we need to deliver, right? We need to make sure that we keep the lights on. And for that, we have the technologies today. We have been working in the last decades to develop those technologies to the state they are today. We have some issues with the grids. We need to relieve more capacity there to get over these congestions and the curtailment and remove maybe some money out of that and reinvest. But at the end of the day, it's all a matter of getting out there and implement as much as possible megawatt hours for our homes. There is a bottleneck in the supply chain that all of us are working to address and to clear such that the projects are implemented as quickly as possible. We also have learned that the policies are being addressed, are being adapted, and there are different mechanisms where we are basically facilitating the development of these projects to happen faster. Sure, it's work in progress, and we will continue working on that, and we will do our part on ETIPWind, and as agreed with the European Commission here, we will collaborate to just work from two sides of the story in making sure we are putting the right policies in place, the right regulations for all of us to move faster towards our goals. The second bucket is midterm, which the goal is the same. We have to keep the lights on, but we have to keep the lights on for tomorrow. And tomorrow may be slightly different than it is today. Tomorrow, we want it to be powered by renewables, right? We want it to have 50% wind in this system, but also the system, as we heard from Norella, has to change, has to evolve, has to be designed differently. And it's not only the system that has to be designed differently, but my main learning here today was from the session on accessibility and acceptability and acceptance and the differences between the two, that possibly at ETIP we need to start thinking about designing wind and designing the energy system differently than we did before. It was designed to be used, it was designed to deliver the electrons to homes. Now it gets closer to us and it has also to be designed for us to accept it. And so those turbines have to be accepted, those probably buildings, grids, substations, whatever we will put around have to be accepted in a way or another. So this design for acceptability was something that caught my attention. But it's not only designing for acceptability, it's also designing for sustainability. So everything we do, we need to make sure has no impact on the environment, has no big impact of ecosystem, and we want to have a circular economy as soon as possible. And one other thing for design that I will cite Jacob on this, we wanted to design to be built forever, like the cathedral or the city hall or something else. So make it evergreen, right? Wind turbines. But those are the challenges that we embrace quite happily at the ETIPWind, because those are where makes us feel at home, right? Makes us feel or useful, right? And deliver our value to the society. So we will take that with the steering committees and definitely will put part of our agenda, working agenda moving forward. And one thing that I also noted here is funding is not an issue. I have a question mark and a smiley, Lukas, there. So it's yeah, European. So I think, yes, there has been, and I think Rosalinde also mentioned this morning, right? There have been trillions of euros thrown at the Green Deal, right? There is available for research and innovation 95.9 billions, right? So there is money, right? Let's just come with the right proposals. Let's work closely with the European Commission and understand where are those pockets of activities that we can do to, number one, address the short-term needs, and number two, start already on the mid-term needs. Because if we don't address also today the mid-term needs, they will be short-term forever, and that we cannot operate that way. We cannot address crisis after crisis. We need to solve it and at the same time prepare for another one not to come anymore. With that, I would like to close with a sentence from Lena on this. Wind is the best technology to decarbonize the society. So let's use it. And it's up to us to make it usable. Once again, thank you very much for coming down here to Brussels and for being so interactive audience. Thanks for all your inputs, support, ideas. We will move forward with those in mind.